The Lost Riders of Rohan. Chapter 1. Whispers on the Wind. The golden hall of Meduseld gleamed in the late afternoon sun, its timbers and gilded roof catching fire with the day's fading light. From the stone steps leading to the great doors, Aldor son of Aldhelm surveyed the rolling plains that stretched toward the distant mountains. To most eyes, the sight would have been one of pure beauty, the tall grasses of Rohan bending in waves beneath the spring winds, dotted with the small figures of horses grazing in the distance. But Aldor's young eyes narrowed with concern as they fixed on the western horizon, where dark clouds gathered above the gap of Rohan. There had been too many such storms of late, all coming from the direction of Isengard, all carrying an unnatural chill that settled deep in the bones and left livestock restless through the night. Still watching the weather, cousin? The voice startled him from his contemplation. Aldor turned to find Theodred, son of King Theoden and second marshal of the Riddermark, standing behind him. Though they were only distant kin, Aldor's grandmother being the king's aunt, Theodred had always treated the younger rider with the warmth of close family. "There's something unnatural in those clouds," Aldor replied, nodding toward the western horizon. "Third storm this month, and always from the same direction." Theodred's expression grew serious as he followed Aldor's gaze. "Aye, and not the only strange thing coming from the west these days." He placed a hand on the younger man's shoulder. "The king has called a council. Your father would have attended were he not patrolling the eastern borders, so as his son and a rider of your Eord, the honor falls to you." Surprise showed plainly on Aldor's face. At 20 summers, he was among the youngest of the Rohirrim to have earned his place in an Eord. To be summoned to council with the king and his advisors was unprecedented for one of his limited experience. "Surely there are others more qualified," he began. "There are others more seasoned," Theodred corrected with a slight smile, "but few with your eye for detail or your knowledge of the western territories. Your mapping expeditions have not gone unnoticed, cousin." Heat rushed to Aldor's cheeks. His habit of sketching detailed maps of the lands he patrolled had earned him gentle mockery from his fellow riders, who called him the scribe when they thought he couldn't hear. That Theodred, and apparently the king himself, knew of this hobby and valued it rather than ridiculed it came as a welcome surprise. "When does the council meet?" he asked, straightening his posture. "Now," Theodred replied, already turning toward the great doors of Meduseld. "And I would advise keeping your observations about those western storms to yourself until invited to speak. My father's advisor has strong opinions about what information deserves the king's attention." Aldor nodded, understanding the unspoken warning. Grima Wormtongue, the king's chief counselor, was known for his dismissal of anything that might suggest trouble brewing in Isengard. The wizard Saruman had been a friend and ally to Rohan for generations. To imply otherwise was to invite Grima's particular brand of soft-spoken scorn. As they passed through the massive wooden doors into the hall itself, Aldor was struck as always by the contrast between exterior brightness and interior dimness. Meduseld was illuminated primarily by fire, great braziers spaced along the central aisle, and torches mounted on the carved wooden pillars that supported the high roof. Between the limited light and the smoke that never fully escaped through the vents above, the hall perpetually existed in a twilight state that made faces difficult to read and intentions harder still. King Theoden sat upon his carved throne at the far end of the hall, his once powerful frame now slightly stooped, his golden hair and beard streaked heavily with white. To his right stood Grima, pale and hunched, his dark robes a stark contrast to the rich greens and golds worn by the Rohirrim. To the king's left stood Hama, captain of the royal guard, his hand never far from his sword hilt. What surprised Aldor was the presence of two strangers among the gathered Rohirrim advisors and captains. Near one of the side tables stood a tall, broad-shouldered man, whose dark coloring and russet leathers marked him as one of the Dunlendings, the wild men of the hills who had feuded with the Rohirrim for generations. His presence in Meduseld would have been shocking enough, but he also wore the ceremonial braids of a Dunlending chieftain, interwoven with polished stones that clicked softly whenever he moved. The second stranger stood slightly apart from the gathering, observing with the practiced neutrality of one accustomed to foreign courts. His clothing was finer than anything typically seen in Rohan, a tunic of deep blue beneath a black surcoat embroidered with the white tree of Gondor, a messenger from their southern allies. Then, though something in his bearing suggested he was more than a simple courier, Theodred led Aldor to a position among the other assembled advisors, then moved to stand beside his father's throne. The king's eyes, which had seemed distant and unfocused when they entered, sharpened at his son's approach. "All are gathered," Theoden announced, his voice stronger than his appearance would suggest. "We may begin." He gestured toward the Dunlending. "I present Brega, son of Bregar, chieftain of the Falcon clan. He comes under banner of truce to speak of matters that concern both our peoples." Murmurs rippled through the gathered Rohirrim. A Dunlending chieftain coming voluntarily to Edoras was unprecedented in living memory. The feud between their peoples stretched back to the founding of Rohan itself, when Eorl the Young had been granted these lands by Gondor, lands the Dunlendings considered rightfully theirs. Brega stepped forward, his movements deliberate and proud. Though clearly uncomfortable being surrounded by traditional enemies, he showed no fear as he addressed the king. "Lord of the Horselands," he began, using the Dunlending term for Rohan rather than acknowledging Theoden's royal title, "I come not in friendship but in necessity. Something stirs in the shadow of the wizard's tower that threatens both our peoples." Grima's response was immediate. "Such dramatic claims," he said, his voice soft yet carrying easily through the hall. "The Dunlendings come with tales of shadow and threat whenever they seek advantage. Perhaps your clan simply faces a harsh spring and hopes to gain concessions from Rohan's abundance." The insult was thinly veiled, suggesting the Dunlendings were beggars rather than proud warriors. Brega's jaw tightened, but he maintained his composure. "My people do not beg," he replied evenly, "nor do we invent enemies when we have more than enough real ones." His gaze moved pointedly from Grima to the king. "3 settlements in the western hills have been found abandoned in the past month. No signs of battle, no bodies, just empty huts with meals half-eaten on tables and clothes still hanging to dry." "People relocate all the time," Grima countered with a dismissive wave. "Perhaps they simply moved to more fertile ground, leaving behind their weapons, their tools, the carved totems of their ancestors." Brega shook his head firmly. "No Dunlending would abandon such things willingly. They were taken, or they fled in such haste that they could carry nothing with them." The king leaned forward slightly. "Taken by whom, or what?" "That is what I came to discover," Brega replied. "My scouts followed tracks leading from the most recently abandoned settlement. Many booted feet, moving with purpose, not the random patterns of raiders. The tracks led toward the Gap of Rohan, toward Isengard." At this Grima laughed softly. "And now we reach the true purpose of this visit. To cast suspicion on Saruman the White, the greatest of wizards and Rohan's most steadfast ally. How convenient that these alleged tracks lead to your traditional enemy's strongest friend." The Dunlending's face darkened, his hand instinctively moving toward the axe at his belt before he mastered himself. "I do not lie about what my own eyes have seen. Something moves in the shadow of Isengard, taking my people in the night. Whether the wizard commands it or is ignorant of it, I cannot say. But the tracks do not lie. Tracks can be misinterpreted, Grima persisted, especially by those eager to find confirming evidence for their suspicions. Before Brega could respond, the messenger from Gondor stepped forward. "If I may, King Theoden," he said, his accent refined but his Rohirric surprisingly fluent. "Perhaps I might offer perspective that bears on this matter." Theoden nodded his permission, seemingly relieved by the interruption of what threatened to become a heated exchange. "I am Taranir, advisor to the steward of Gondor." The man introduced himself with a slight bow. "I bring greetings from Lord Denethor, who sends me not only as messenger but as observer. Strange reports have reached Minas Tirith in recent months. Unusual movements along our western borders, increased orc activity in the mountains, and most concerning, the disappearance of several ranger outposts that monitored the lands approaching Isengard from the south." This revelation caused a stir among the gathered Rohirrim. Coincidences might be dismissed, but when both their northern and southern neighbors reported similar concerns, all centered around the same geographical area, even the most skeptical would take note. "Rangers do not abandon their posts lightly," Taranir continued, "nor do they fall easily to conventional enemies. Whatever removed them did so with such efficiency that no warnings were sent, no bodies recovered. Much like our missing patrol," Theodred said quietly, looking to his father. Aldor's attention sharpened. He had heard rumors of a missing patrol but had assumed they were simply delayed by weather or extended duties. From the grave expressions now visible around the hall, it seemed the situation was far more serious. "What missing patrol?" Brega demanded, looking between Theodred and the king. It was Hama who answered, his voice heavy with concern. 6 days ago, an Eord of 12 riders led by Marshal Dunher failed to return from routine patrol along the western borders. A search party found their campsite abandoned, cook fires still burning, equipment left behind, horses gone. No signs of battle, no blood, no bodies. They simply vanished." The Dunlending chieftain's expression shifted from suspicion to grim validation. "Then it is as I feared. Whatever hunts in the shadows does not discriminate between our peoples." Grima's pale face showed the first signs of genuine concern, though he quickly masked it. "Speculation serves no purpose. Patrols can be delayed by many factors, whether mechanical breakdowns, injuries requiring rest. To leap from missing men to some grand conspiracy is the height of irresponsibility. 12 experienced riders do not simultaneously encounter accidents that prevent any from returning or sending word," Theodred countered, a rare edge in his voice as he addressed the counselor directly. "And they certainly do not abandon their campsite while food still cooks over their fires." "What would you have us do, my son?" Theoden asked, his momentary sharpness already fading back into the distracted weariness that had increasingly characterized him in recent years. "March on Isengard based on disappearances that might yet have innocent explanations." "I would have us investigate with appropriate caution," Theodred replied. "Send a small company of our best scouts to follow the trail of our missing riders, coordinating with Brega's people who know the western hills better than we do." Grima began to object, but Taranir spoke over him. "Gondor would support such an initiative. Lord Denethor has authorized me to offer the services of our best trackers to assist in this matter. He considers any threat to Rohan a threat to Gondor as well, given our long alliance." The king seemed to struggle with the decision, his gaze moving from his son to Grima and back again. Finally he nodded slowly. "We shall investigate, but with caution. Theodred, select a small company, no more than 5 riders for stealth rather than strength. They will depart tomorrow at first light." "I volunteer to lead this company," Theodred said immediately. "No," Theoden's response was unexpectedly firm. You are needed here as second marshal. This task requires skilled scouts who can move undetected, not the realm's military leadership. Before Theodred could argue further, Grima leaned down to whisper something in the king's ear. Theoden nodded thoughtfully, then turned his gaze directly to Aldor, who stiffened in surprise at suddenly becoming the focus of royal attention. "Young Aldor," the king said, "I am told you have exceptional knowledge of the western territories and skill at mapping unexplored lands. You shall lead this scouting party." Stunned silence fell over the hall. Aldor felt the weight of every gaze upon him, none heavier than Theodred's, whose expression mingled concern with something that might have been suspicion, not of Aldor himself, but of the suggestion's source. "I am honored, my king," Aldor managed, knowing he had no right to refuse but equally aware that he was being thrust into a position far beyond his experience. "Though surely there are more seasoned leaders who might." "The king has decided," Grima interrupted smoothly. "Sometimes fresh eyes see what veteran gazes overlook, and your relative inexperience means you will approach this mission with proper caution rather than reckless confidence. The implication that other candidates, particularly Theodred, might act recklessly hung in the air, but none dared challenge the king's counselor directly. "Very well," Theodred said after a moment, his tone carefully neutral. "Aldor shall lead with my full confidence. I request only that I be permitted to select the other members of his company." The king nodded his assent, seemingly relieved that his son had accepted the decision without further argument. "I will accompany them," Brega announced, making it a statement rather than a request. "My people know paths through the western hills that no Rohirrim has ever walked, and I have personal interest in discovering what happened to my missing kinsmen." "As will I," Taranir added. "Lord Denethor would expect no less, and my skills as tracker might prove useful." Theoden considered briefly, then nodded. "So be it. Aldor will lead a company of 3 Rohirrim riders, to be joined by Brega of Dunland and Taranir of Gondor. 5 riders and 2 allies, small enough for stealth, diverse enough for effectiveness." He rose from his throne with visible effort. "Prepare well, you depart at dawn." With that, the king made his way from the hall, supported by Grima, whose pale eyes lingered on Aldor with an expression that might have been satisfaction before he turned away. As the council dispersed, Theodred pulled Aldor aside, speaking in low tones that would not carry beyond them. "This is Grima's doing," he said without preamble. "He does not want experienced eyes investigating what happens near Isengard. Be vigilant, cousin. Trust your instincts more than your orders." "Why would he suggest me?" Aldor asked, genuinely confused. "I'm hardly a threat to whatever schemes he might harbor." "Perhaps because your father is away and cannot oppose your selection. Perhaps because he underestimates you." Theodred's expression grew more serious. "Or perhaps because sending the king's young cousin into potential danger gives him leverage over both you and me." The implication sent a chill down Aldor's spine. He had always viewed court politics from a comfortable distance, content in his role as a junior rider in his Eorl. Now he stood at the center of machinations he barely understood, tasked with a mission whose true purpose seemed veiled behind layers of unstated intentions. "Choose your companions carefully," Brega advised, joining them with the quiet tread that seemed impossible for a man of his size. "This journey will test more than your riding skills, young hawk." "Why do you agree to this?" Aldor asked the Dunlending directly. "Your people have no love for Rohan. Why risk yourself alongside enemies?" Brega's weathered face showed grudging respect for the directness of the question. "Because something worse than old enemies now stalks our shared borders," he answered. "And because I have seen what was left of the few who escaped the taking of our settlements. Their minds were broken, their spirits crushed. Before they died, they spoke of shadows that walked like men but were not men, of cold voices commanding in a tongue that hurt the ears to hear. Taranir, who had approached silently during this exchange, nodded grimly. The rangers reported similar accounts before their outposts went silent. Something gathers in the shadow of the wizard's tower, something that leaves no bodies, takes no plunder, yet steals away both Dunlendings and Rohirrim without triggering alarms or leaving signs of struggle. Aldor looked between these two strangers who would now be his companions, the proud Dunlending chieftain and the refined Gondorian diplomat. Then back to Theodred, whose concern was plainly written across his features. Whatever task Grima thought he was assigning to an inexperienced youth seemed far more complex and dangerous than a simple scouting mission. "I will need maps," he said finally, decision crystallizing within him. "All the information we have on the territories surrounding Isengard, the last known locations of the missing Rohirrim, the Dunlending settlements, and the ranger outposts. If there is a pattern to be found, I intend to find it." Theodred's expression lightened slightly. "Now you sound like the cousin I know. Come, we have much to prepare before dawn, including selecting the riders who will accompany you." As they left the Golden Hall, Aldor cast one final glance toward the western horizon, where the storm clouds had grown darker and more ominous during the council meeting. Something unnatural gathered there, just as Brega and Taranir suggested. And tomorrow, for better or worse, he would be riding directly toward it, leading a mission that might reveal secrets powerful men preferred left undiscovered. The wind from the west carried a chill that seemed to bypass his woolen cloak entirely, settling into his bones with fingers of ice. Within that cold, he could have sworn he heard whispers, voices speaking words just beyond comprehension, calling with seductive malice from the shadows gathering between Edoras and Isengard. Pulling his cloak tighter, Aldor turned away from the darkening horizon and followed Theodred into Meduseld to prepare for whatever awaited them in the morning light. Chapter 2. Westward Bound. Dawn broke over the plains of Rohan with deceptive serenity, painting the rolling grasslands in hues of gold and amber. From the stables below Meduseld, Aldor checked his mount's saddle straps one final time, his mind racing through preparations even as his hands moved with practiced efficiency. Despite his outward calm, apprehension churned within him. Never had he led a mission of such importance, and certainly never with companions as diverse or potentially antagonistic as those who would ride with him today. "She's ready," a quiet voice assured him. "I checked her myself." Aldor turned to find Eowyn, the king's niece, standing behind him. Though she wore a simple dress rather than riding leathers, her bearing was every bit as proud as any warrior of the mark. "Lady Eowyn," he greeted her with a respectful nod. "I didn't realize you were aware of our departure." "Little happens in Edoras without my knowledge," she replied with the ghost of a smile. "Especially when it involves my cousin, sending another cousin into potential danger." Theodred had indeed spent the previous evening selecting Aldor's Rohirrim companions with meticulous care. The choices spoke volumes about his concerns. Haleth, a veteran scout whose ability to move unseen rivaled that of the elves, if the stories were to be believed, and Falkred, a young but gifted tracker whose quiet demeanor belied a keen intelligence and unwavering loyalty to Theodred. "He chose well," Eowyn continued, as if reading Aldor's thoughts. "Haleth sees what others miss, and Falkred would die before betraying you." Her voice dropped lower. "But watch the Gondorian. His loyalties may be divided." Aldor raised an eyebrow. "Between Gondor and Rohan, between Denethor and others who might command his attention." Her gray eyes held a warning she would not speak aloud within the walls of Edoras, where Grima's informants might overhear. "The White Wizard has many friends in many realms." Before Aldor could pursue this concerning implication, the stable doors opened to admit Brega. The Dunlending chieftain had exchanged his ceremonial attire for practical traveling leathers, though he still wore the polished stone beads in his braided hair. His expression remained guarded as he nodded curtly to Aldor, then offered a more formal bow to Eowyn. "The White Lady of Rohan," he said, using a title Aldor had never heard before. "Your reputation reaches even the hills of Dunland." Something like surprise flickered across Eowyn's features before she composed herself. "I was unaware I had any reputation among your people, chieftain. A woman who trains with sword when she believes none watch, who rides as skillfully as any man in the mark. Such stories travel." There was genuine respect in Brega's tone, unusual from a Dunlending speaking of any Rohirrim, let alone nobility. The stable doors opened again, admitting Haelith, Falkred, and Taranir. The Gondorian diplomat had exchanged his fine attire for the practical leathers of a ranger, though the white tree remained emblazoned on his cloak clasp. Haelith, a weathered man whose age was difficult to determine beneath his sun-creased features, carried himself with the quiet confidence of one who had survived countless patrols along dangerous borders. Young Falkred, barely older than Aldor himself, moved with the deliberate silence of a born tracker. "All are assembled," Taranir observed. "We should depart before the sun climbs much higher. Stealth will be our greatest advantage." Eowyn touched Aldor's arm briefly. "Return safely, cousin," she said, her voice for his ears alone. "And remember, trust what you see with your own eyes, not what others tell you that you see." With that cryptic warning, she withdrew, nodding respectfully to the others as she departed the stables. Aldor watched her go, wondering at the layers of unspoken concern in her parting words. Like Theodred, Eowyn clearly suspected complications beyond a simple scouting mission. "Your horses are well trained," Brega observed, breaking the momentary silence as he inspected the assembled mounts. "But they are also conspicuous. A Rohirrim steed is recognizable for leagues, and we ride toward enemies who will be watching for such signs." "Which is why we will not take the direct route," Aldor replied, making a decision he had contemplated through the night. "Our official orders may be to follow the Great West Road toward Isengard, but I believe we will learn more by approaching from an unexpected direction." This declaration earned him evaluating looks from his companions. Haelith's weathered face revealed nothing, though his eyes sharpened with interest. Falkred seemed momentarily surprised before nodding with approval. Taranir's expression remained diplomatically neutral, while Brega showed the first hint of genuine respect since their introduction. "You suggest we circumvent rather than confront," the Dunlending said. "Wise for one so young." "I suggest we approach as scouts rather than soldiers," Aldor corrected. "Our mission is to discover what happened to the missing riders and, if possible, locate them, not to challenge whatever force took them." "A prudent distinction," Taranir agreed. "What route do you propose?" Aldor unrolled a map across a nearby tack table, weighing the corners with grooming brushes. "We ride north first, as if heading toward the wold. After we're beyond sight of Edoras, we turn northwest, crossing the Entwash at the shallows near Fangorn Forest's southern border." "Fangorn," Haelith spoke for the first time, his voice low and gravelly from years of giving commands in the field. "Those woods have an ill reputation." "We skirt its edges only," Aldor assured him. "It provides cover for our westward approach while keeping us north of where the missing patrol was last seen. From there, we can work our way south and west, approaching the Gap of Rohan from an angle unlikely to be closely watched." Brega studied the map critically. "This route passes near several of my people's abandoned settlements," he noted. "We could investigate them along the way, perhaps find signs that would help us understand what we face." "My thoughts exactly," Aldor confirmed. If the same force is responsible for taking both Dunlendings and Rohirrim, examining all sites may reveal patterns invisible when viewed separately. The group fell silent as they considered the plan. It was Falkred who finally spoke, his soft voice carrying the weight of practicality. The journey will take 3 days at least, perhaps 4 with detours to the abandoned settlements. We should carry additional provisions in case hunting proves difficult. Already arranged, Aldor replied, grateful for Theodred's assistance the previous night in securing supplies without drawing undue attention. The kitchens provided enough dried meat and hardtack for a week's journey. Then we waste daylight, Haleth concluded, turning toward his horse. The sooner we depart, the farther we'll be before anyone notes our direction differs from what might be expected. The implication hung unspoken between them, that someone in Edoras might take unwelcome interest in their movements. Grima's shadow stretched long across their mission, though none dared name him directly. They mounted swiftly and departed Edoras with minimal ceremony, passing through the gates as dawn gave way to early morning. Aldor felt the watching eyes of the gate guards and wondered how quickly word of their departure would reach Grima's ears. If the king's counselor expected them to ride directly west toward Isengard, how long would it take him to discover they had chosen a different path? Uneasy thoughts cloud your face, young hawk, Brega observed as they rode side by side, the gates of Edoras receding behind them. You fear treachery from within your own nest. Aldor glanced sharply at the Dunlending. I said no such thing. You didn't need to. I have survived 40 summers in lands where trust is as rare as gold. I recognize the look of a man who watches his back within his own halls. Brega's dark eyes held neither mockery nor judgment, only pragmatic understanding. It is not weakness to acknowledge the vipers that may share your hearth. Before Aldor could formulate a response that neither confirmed nor denied these uncomfortably accurate observations, Taranir urged his mount forward to join them. We are watched, the Gondorian said casually, as if commenting on the weather. Rider on the eastern watchtower, tracking our progress with particular interest. Aldor resisted the impulse to look back toward Edoras. Can you tell who it might be? Not at this distance, but they hold something that catches the sun occasionally, perhaps a looking glass or spyglass. Taranir's tone remained conversational, though his eyes constantly scanned their surroundings. They will note our northward heading, which should buy us time before any realize our true direction. The small company rode steadily throughout the morning, maintaining the pretense of heading northeast until the golden hall of Meduseld was no more than a distant gleam on the horizon behind them. Only then did Aldor signal the change of direction, guiding them northwest toward the distant line of the Entwash. As they rode, Haleth drifted forward to ride at Aldor's side, his experienced gaze continuously sweeping the horizon. The boy is skilled, he commented, nodding toward Falkred who rode slightly ahead, reading the land for signs of any passage before them. Theodred chose well. He chose you both with specific purpose, Aldor replied, though I confess I'm not entirely certain what qualities he sought. Haleth's weathered face creased in what might have been a smile. Discretion, primarily, and experience with unusual circumstances. He paused, seeming to consider how much to reveal. I was part of the search party that discovered the missing patrol's campsite. This was unexpected news. What did you see there? Aldor asked, keeping his voice low enough that only Haleth could hear. Absence, the veteran replied cryptically. Not just of men, but of struggle. 12 experienced riders do not vanish without leaving signs of resistance unless. He trailed off, clearly uncomfortable with the conclusion his observation suggested. Unless they had no opportunity to resist, Aldor finished for him, or no desire to. Haleth nodded grimly. Their horses were gone too, which suggests they rode away rather than being carried. Yet they left everything else behind: weapons, supplies, personal effects. No rider of the mark willingly abandons his sword. Could they have been beckoned away by someone they trusted? Aldor wondered aloud. Marshal Dunher was leading them, Haleth replied with emphasis. He served the king for 30 years. No one could command his obedience except Theoden himself or perhaps Theodred. This detail heightened Aldor's unease considerably. Dunher was indeed among the most trusted and experienced of the king's marshals. If something had lured him from his camp, leaving even his weapons behind, what hope did their small company have of resisting similar influence? "There's something else," Haleth added, his voice dropping even lower. "Something I reported to Theodred but not to the full council. The ashes in their campfires were cold, suggesting at least a day had passed since their disappearance. Yet the meat suspended over one fire showed no signs of decay. It was as fresh as if it had been placed there moments before we arrived." A chill ran down Aldor's spine that had nothing to do with the spring breeze. "As if time itself had behaved strangely around their disappearance," he murmured. Haleth nodded once, sharply. "The wizard's influence, perhaps. Theodred believed it significant enough to keep private." Their conversation ended, as Falkred raised a hand in warning from his forward position. The young tracker had dismounted and knelt beside something in the tall grass that had caught his attention. As the others approached, Aldor saw it was a broken arrow. Its shaft snapped, but its distinctive fletching unmistakable. "Rohan make," Falkred confirmed as they gathered around him. "Recently broken, the wood hasn't weathered, and the break is clean rather than splintered by exposure. We're nowhere near the normal patrol routes," Aldor observed, surveying the empty grasslands stretching in all directions. "No rider should have passed this way in months." Taranir dismounted to examine the arrow more closely. "The break appears deliberate," he noted, pointing to marks along the shaft. "Not snapped by impact or accident, but bent until it fractured." "A signal," Haleth suggested, "left by someone who passed this way and wished to mark their route." "Or a warning," Brega countered darkly, "to tell us we are not the first to take this supposedly secret path." The implication hung heavy in the air between them. If the broken arrow had indeed been left by one of the missing riders, it suggested they had traveled far from their assigned patrol route before disappearing. And if it had been left by someone else, someone tracking their movements even now, then their mission might already be compromised. "We continue forward," Aldor decided after a moment's consideration, "but with heightened caution. Falkred, watch for any similar signs that might indicate who left this and why." The tracker nodded, pocketing the broken arrow before remounting. They proceeded more cautiously now, spreading out slightly to cover more ground while remaining within sight of one another. The rolling plains offered little cover, which provided some reassurance that they couldn't easily be ambushed, but also meant their own presence would be visible to any watching eyes. By midday, the distant smudge of Fangorn Forest became visible on the northwestern horizon, its dark mass a stark contrast to the golden grasslands. Between their position and the forest flowed the Entwash, a silver ribbon winding through the plains. They would reach the crossing point by evening if they maintained their pace. "We are being followed," Taranir announced casually as they paused to rest the horses. He made no obvious movement to look behind them, instead adjusting his saddle straps with methodical attention. "2 riders, perhaps 3. They keep to the low ground where possible, using the contours of the land for concealment." Aldor fought the urge to turn and scan the horizon. "How far back?" "Half a league, perhaps more. They appear in brief glimpses when they crest rises, then disappear again. They're skilled. Had I not been watching specifically for such movement, I might have dismissed it as deer or wild horses." "Rohirrim?" Aldor asked, though he already suspected the answer. "The distance makes it difficult to be certain, but they ride like men accustomed to horses, and their cloaks appear dark, not the green of your people. Brega's expression darkened. Dunlendings, you suggest. My people have no quarrel with this mission. I suggest nothing, Taranir replied evenly. I merely report what little I can observe. Dark cloaks could belong to many peoples. Regardless of who they are, their presence concerns me. Aldor interjected before tensions could escalate. We left Edoras only hours ago. For anyone to have organized pursuit so quickly suggests they were prepared before we even departed. Or they were already in position, watching the approaches to Edoras, Haleth suggested grimly, waiting to see who might be sent to investigate the disappearances. This possibility was more disturbing still. It implied their expedition had been anticipated by forces unknown, perhaps the same forces responsible for the missing riders and Dunlending settlements. We could set an ambush, Falkrid suggested quietly. Double back after nightfall and discover who follows us. Brega nodded approval at the suggestion, his hand moving instinctively to the axe at his belt. Haleth seemed to consider the strategy with professional assessment, neither immediately accepting nor rejecting it. No, Aldor decided after weighing the options. Our primary mission remains finding the missing patrol. If we engage these pursuers, we risk alerting whatever larger force they might represent. For now, we continue as planned but with increased vigilance. And if they attack during the night, Brega challenged. Then we defend ourselves, Aldor replied simply. But I will not divert from our purpose based on shadows glimpsed at a distance. These followers may be scouts like ourselves, sent by allies rather than enemies. Though clearly not entirely satisfied, the others accepted his decision. They resumed their journey, now uncomfortably aware of distant movements occasionally visible on the horizon behind them. The knowledge of being watched added tension to their progress, each rider scanning the surrounding grasslands with heightened alertness. As the afternoon waned, they approached the banks of the Entwash. The river flowed swift but shallow here, with a gravelly ford that would allow them to cross without swimming the horses. On the far bank, the first gnarled trees of Fangorn's outskirts loomed with uninviting aspect. We should cross now and make camp on the other side, Haleth advised. Defensible position with the river at our backs, and we can use the edge of the forest for additional cover. No, Brega said firmly, surprising them all with his vehemence. No camp within arrowshot of Fangorn. Those trees harbor ancient Angers. Taranir raised an eyebrow. I had thought such superstitions beneath a chieftain of your stature. The Dunlending's expression hardened. It is not superstition to respect powers older than men. My grandfather entered those woods on a hunt 50 summers ago. He emerged 3 days later having aged 20 years, his hair white, his mind broken. He spoke only of walking trees and voices in the bark, until his death the following winter. A tense silence followed this declaration. The people of Rohan generally avoided Fangorn as well, though more from practical caution than specific incidents. The forest had an undeniably forbidding air about it, its ancient trees twisted into shapes that sometimes resembled watchful, unfriendly faces. We camp here, then, Aldor decided, gesturing to a slight depression near the riverbank that would conceal their fire from distant observation, and cross at first light. As they dismounted and began establishing camp, Falkrid approached Aldor privately. The followers have stopped, he reported quietly. They maintain position just beyond clear sight, watching but not advancing. Reconnaissance, then, Aldor concluded. They wish to confirm our route but not engage us directly. He considered the implications for a moment. Double the watch tonight. 2 awake at all times, rotating shifts. Falkrid nodded and moved away to organize the watch schedule with Haleth. Meanwhile, Brega had begun gathering driftwood from the riverbank for a small cooking fire. while Taranir unsaddled the horses and arranged their equipment in a defensive semicircle. As twilight descended over the plains, transforming the golden grasslands to silver in the fading light, Aldor found himself staring westward toward the gap of Rohan. Somewhere beyond that distant passage lay Isengard, where Saruman the White had dwelled for centuries as guardian and ally to the realm of Rohan. If the wizard had indeed turned against them, as the disappearances and strange occurrences suggested, what power could 5 riders hope to wield against him? Your thoughts travel dark paths, Taranir observed, joining him by the riverbank. Doubt serves no purpose once a journey has begun. Not doubt, Aldor corrected, preparation. I would understand what we face before we face it. The Gondorian studied him with newfound interest. Theodred chose better than Grima intended, I think. You are young but not foolish. You speak openly of court politics for a diplomat, Aldor noted, watching the man's reaction carefully. Taranir smiled thinly. Diplomacy has its place, primarily within stone walls where words are weapons. Out here, with lives at stake, clarity serves better than courtesy. He gazed westward, his expression growing somber. Gondor has suspected Saruman's changing allegiance for nearly a year. Small signs at first, messengers delayed or turned away from Isengard, strange travelers seen entering the ring of Isengard under cover of darkness. Yet Gondor said nothing to Rohan. Aldor couldn't keep the accusation from his tone. Lord Denethor raised concerns through proper channels, Taranir replied carefully. But certain advisors to your king dismissed them as paranoia from a failing steward. Grima, obviously, though again the name remained unspoken. The pieces aligned with disturbing neatness. The king's council are actively working to suppress information about potential threats from Isengard, then maneuvering to ensure an inexperienced leader headed the investigation when circumstances forced action. Why are you really here, Taranir of Gondor? Aldor asked directly. Not just to track missing men or deliver messages. The Gondorian's gaze remained fixed on the western horizon. To confirm what we already suspect, but cannot prove without direct evidence. That Saruman no longer stands as ally to the free peoples of Middle-earth. That he gathers forces in secret, for purposes that bode ill for both our realms. And if we find such evidence, then I return to Minas Tirith with all haste, while you bring word to those in Edoras who can still be trusted. Taranir finally turned to meet Aldor's gaze directly. The storm comes, young rider of Rohan. What we seek on this journey is not just missing men, but confirmation of how soon it will break upon us all. As darkness settled over their small camp, Aldor felt the weight of responsibility pressing down upon him with newfound gravity. This mission, thrust upon him through political maneuvering, now revealed itself as potentially crucial to the future of both Rohan and Gondor. Whatever they discovered in the days ahead might determine how prepared, or unprepared, the realms of men would be for the conflict Taranir so confidently predicted. In the deepening gloom, the first watch took their positions while the others sought what rest they could find. Aldor settled beside the dying embers of their small fire, his hand resting instinctively on his sword hilt. Beyond the circle of their camp, the vast grasslands of Rohan stretched in darkness, concealing both the distant followers who watched them and whatever greater threats lurked in the shadows near Isengard. Somewhere in that darkness, 12 riders of the mark had vanished without struggle or warning. As sleep finally claimed him, Aldor's dreams were troubled by visions of empty helmets arranged in perfect circles, and the distant tower of Orthanc rising like a black spear against storm-laden skies. Chapter 3: Shadows and Stones. Morning dawned gray and misty along the banks of the Entwash. Aldor woke to the sound of hushed voices, Haleth and Falkrid conferring near the water's edge, their postures tense as they surveyed the western shore. He rose quickly, hand instinctively checking for his sword before approaching the two scouts. "Trouble?" he asked quietly, not wishing to disturb the others who still slept. Haleth pointed toward the far bank where the mist swirled thickly among the first gnarled trees of Fangorn's outskirts. "Tracks, fresh ones. Someone crossed during the night." This was disturbing news. Aldor squinted through the morning haze, but could discern nothing unusual on the opposite shore. "How many?" "Difficult to be certain," Falkred replied, his young face grave. "The ford disrupts clear prints, but at least 3 sets of boots, maybe more. Heavy tread, deeper than normal men would leave." "Orcs," Aldor suggested, though the possibility seemed unlikely. Orcs rarely traveled openly across the plains of Rohan, especially so close to Fangorn Forest, which they were known to fear. "No," Haleth shook his head firmly. "No drag marks from clawed toes, more like men in heavy armor, but—" He hesitated, seeming reluctant to voice his observation. "But what?" Aldor pressed. "The stride is wrong, too long for normal men, yet the spacing is perfectly uniform, as if they marched in exact synchronization." A chill ran down Aldor's spine that had nothing to do with the morning air. Even the most disciplined soldiers of Gondor could not maintain perfect stride across a river ford with uncertain footing. "They came from the west," Falkred added, pointing to barely discernible marks among the gravel. "Crossed eastward, then continued into the grasslands behind us. Toward Edoras." Alarm sharpened Aldor's voice. "No," Haleth replied, his weathered face troubled. "They angled northeast after crossing, almost as if circling behind us," Aldor finished for him, the tactical implication immediately clear. By now, the others had awakened. Brega approached, his hand resting on his axe as he assessed their concerned expressions. "What hunts us?" he asked without preamble. Briefly, Aldor explained what the scouts had discovered. The Dunlendings' response was immediate and pragmatic. "We cross now, while light favors us," he declared. "Better to track than be tracked." "Agreed," Taranir said, joining them. "Whatever left those prints passed close to our camp during the night without attacking. That suggests either caution or purpose beyond immediate confrontation." "Neither provides much comfort," Aldor observed. "But Brega is right. We cross now and pursue our original course." They broke camp with practiced efficiency, erasing as much evidence of their presence as possible before leading their horses into the shallow ford. The Entwash ran swift but only knee-deep at this crossing, its clear waters gurgling over smooth stones. As they reached the western bank, Falkred immediately dismounted to examine the tracks more closely. "Strange," he murmured, kneeling to inspect markings that were nearly invisible to the others. The boots left almost no impression in the softer earth here, as if the wearers weighed far less than their size would suggest. "Or as if they barely touched the ground at all," Haleth added, a note of superstitious dread entering his normally pragmatic tone. "Enough conjecture," Aldor decided, uncomfortable with the direction of their thoughts. "Falkred, can you follow their trail northeast? I want to know where they were headed." The young tracker nodded, for a distance at least. They made little effort to conceal their passage. "Then we split temporarily," Aldor declared, making a swift decision. "Falkred, you and Haleth follow the tracks. See where they lead, but do not engage if you find those who made them. 2 hours only, then rejoin us regardless of what you discover." He turned to the others. "Taranir, Brega, and I will continue westward toward the nearest of the abandoned Dunlending settlements. We'll make better time with fewer riders, and we need to know if these tracks connect to the disappearances." The plan was met with nods of agreement. Though splitting their already small company carried risks, the potential intelligence gained outweighed the danger, provided both groups maintained caution. 2 hours, Haleth confirmed, checking the position of the sun. No more, and we'll leave clear signs for you to follow if we discover anything significant. With that, the group separated. Aldor watched as Haleth and Falkrid rode northeast, following the mysterious tracks into the rolling grasslands. Then he turned his mount westward, where Brega already waited with impatient determination. The nearest settlement lies 3 leagues hence, the Dunlending informed them, pointing toward a low range of hills that rose from the plains like islands in a golden sea. Aelgarth, home to the Wolf clan. 30 families dwelled there until a fortnight ago. What relation is the Wolf clan to your own people? Taranir asked as they rode. Distant cousins, Brega replied. We share autumn gatherings for trade and matchmaking, but maintain separate territories. The Wolf clan has held these eastern hills for 12 generations. Had they reported anything unusual before their disappearance? Aldor inquired. Strangers in the area, unusual weather, anything that might have presaged what was to come. Brega's expression darkened. They sent a runner 3 days before they vanished. He spoke of cold mists that rose from the ground at night, and of dreams that troubled even the strongest warriors, visions of a white hand reaching from darkness. Aldor and Taranir exchanged significant glances. The white hand was Saruman's emblem, prominently displayed on his tower of Orthanc. If the Dunlendings had dreamed of it before their disappearance, the connection to Isengard grew more difficult to dismiss. This runner, Taranir asked carefully, what became of him? He returned to Aelgarth the day before the disappearance, Brega replied grimly. Whatever took his people took him also. They rode in silence for a time, each contemplating the implications of this information. The morning mist burned away as the sun climbed higher, revealing a landscape of austere beauty. Rolling grasslands giving way to rocky hills that would eventually rise into the more rugged territories traditionally held by the Dunlending clans. As they approached the settlement, Aldor found himself tensing instinctively. Though they had seen no signs of immediate danger, the knowledge of what had occurred here, dozens of people vanishing without apparent struggle, set his nerves on edge. Aelgarth appeared on the horizon as a cluster of simple stone dwellings built into the side of a hill, overlooking a small valley where sparse crops grew in carefully tended fields. As they drew closer, the eerie silence of the place became apparent. No smoke rose from cooking fires. No children played among the stone houses. No dogs barked at their approach. The Dunlending way is to build with stone where possible, Brega explained as they rode into the abandoned settlement. Wood rots in the winter rains, but stone endures, as do my people. Yet despite the solidity of their construction, the dwellings now stood empty, doors hanging open to reveal interiors in various states of disruption. Not the chaos of violence or plunder. There were no signs of bloodshed or struggle, but rather the disarray of sudden, unexpected departure. They dismounted at what appeared to be the central gathering area, a circular space surrounded by the largest buildings. Brega moved immediately to one of the doorways, his expression grim as he examined the threshold. Here, he called, crouching to indicate something barely visible in the packed earth. The same tracks, the same uniform stride. Aldor joined him, seeing what did indeed appear to be the same boot prints they had observed at the river crossing, abnormally large, yet leaving surprisingly shallow impressions. They came here before crossing the Entwash, Taranir observed, scanning the surrounding buildings with a tactician's eye, which suggests they may have been returning from rather than heading toward the settlement when they passed near our camp. Returning where? Aldor wondered aloud. To Isengard, perhaps, or to some other staging area between here and there. The Gondorian moved methodically from building to building, examining each with professional thoroughness. No blood, no bodies, no signs of resistance. Just like your missing patrol. Brega had entered the largest dwelling, which Aldor assumed belonged to the clan's chieftain. After a moment, the Dunlending emerged holding something in his hand, a curved knife with a distinctive bone handle, elaborately carved. The Wolf Chief's ceremonial blade, he explained, his voice tight with controlled anger. No warrior of the Wolf clan would willingly leave this behind, any more than your Rohirrim would abandon their swords. It would be buried with the chieftain, or passed to his heir upon death. This matched precisely what they had heard about the abandoned Rohirrim campsite. Weapons and significant personal items left behind, as if their owners had simply walked away without thought for possessions that would normally never be forsaken. What could compel such abandonment? Aldor asked, the question directed as much to himself as to his companions. Enchantment, Brega suggested darkly. The wizard's voice is said to hold great power over the minds of men. Saruman has rarely left Orthanc in recent years, Taranir countered. For him to personally oversee the emptying of Dunlending settlements seems unlikely. His servants, then, Brega insisted, or some device of his creation. Aldor moved deeper into the settlement, examining the arrangement of buildings and the surrounding landscape. The location was well chosen for defense, backed against a rocky hillside, overlooking approaches from all other directions. Even a small force could have held off significant attackers from such a position. No attempts at fortification, he noted. No hastily built barricades or defensive preparations. Whatever came for them, they neither expected it nor resisted it when it arrived. Like sleepwalkers, Taranir suggested, moving without will or awareness. The image was disturbingly apt. Aldor could envision it too clearly. The inhabitants of Aelgarth rising from their beds or meals, laying down tools and weapons and walking away into the night, expressions blank, movements mechanical. We should explore farther, he decided. See if there are any tracks leading away that might indicate the direction they were taken. They separated to examine the outskirts of the settlement, searching for any trail that might reveal where the inhabitants had gone. Aldor took the western perimeter, scanning the rocky ground for disturbances that would indicate the passage of many feet. He had almost completed his circuit when something caught his eye, a pattern scratched into a flat stone at the base of the hillside. At first glance, it appeared to be random marks, perhaps made by weather or wildlife. But as Aldor crouched to examine it more closely, he realized the scratches formed a crude but recognizable shape. 5 lines radiating from a central point like fingers from a palm, a hand. Brega, Taranir, he called, remaining crouched beside the marked stone. When they joined him, he pointed to the etching. What do you make of this? The Dunlending's eyes widened in recognition. The hand from their dreams, he said, his voice hushed. The white hand reaching from darkness. Taranir knelt to examine the marking more closely. Recently carved, he observed. The cuts are still sharp, not weathered, and done hastily with something like a knife point. A warning, Aldor suggested, left by someone who realized what was happening, or a message for others who might come searching, Brega added. Look, there are other marks beside it. Indeed, scratched less deeply but still visible, were several symbols in what Aldor recognized as the runic script used by the Dunlendings. Not fluent in their written language, he looked to Brega for interpretation. The chieftain traced the marks with his finger, brow furrowed in concentration. West, he translated. Then something about shadows and walking. The final word is unclear, but might be willing or possibly controlled. West toward shadows, walking willingly or under control, Taranir pieced together. It confirms our suspicions while telling us little we hadn't already guessed. It tells us the direction, Aldor pointed out, and it confirms that at least one person maintained enough awareness to leave this message. He stood, scanning the western horizon thoughtfully. We should, A sharp whistle cut through the air, causing all three to whirl toward its source. There, at the eastern edge of the settlement, stood a figure on horseback, Haleth, signaling urgently for their attention. The veteran scout's posture conveyed tension even at a distance. They mounted swiftly and rode to meet him, immediately noting the absence of Falkred. "What happened?" Aldor demanded as they approached. "Where is Falkred?" Watching them, Haleth replied tersely. "We followed the tracks northeast for about a league before they changed direction, heading due west. Another league beyond, we found them." "Them," Brega pressed. "Men, or what appear to be men at a distance. Tall figures in dark armor, moving in formation across the plains. At least 20, maybe more." Haleth's weathered face showed unusual concern. "They move with unnatural speed and synchronization, like no troops I've ever seen. And you left Falkred to observe them alone?" Taranir asked with clear disapproval. "The boy knows how to stay hidden," Haleth retorted. "And someone needed to maintain watch while I brought this news. They're heading directly for the Gap of Rohan, along a route that will take them near the site where the missing patrol was last seen." This information shifted their priorities immediately. If these mysterious armored figures were connected to the disappearances, and the matching boot prints strongly suggested they were, then following them might lead directly to answers about both the missing Rohirrim and the Dunlending villagers. "We ride to rejoin Falkred," Aldor decided. "If these figures are indeed heading toward the missing patrol's last known location, they may lead us to whatever force took our people." "And if they detect us?" Taranir asked, clearly calculating risks. 5 against 20 are poor odds, especially if they serve a power like Saruman. "We observe only," Aldor clarified. "No confrontation unless absolutely unavoidable. Our mission remains intelligence, not engagement." With grim nods of agreement, they followed Haleth eastward, then north, riding hard to make up time. The veteran scout led them across the rolling grasslands with unerring precision, despite the absence of clear landmarks. After nearly an hour of steady riding, he signaled for them to slow and approach more cautiously. They crested a gentle rise to find Falkred lying prone in the tall grass, his attention fixed on something in the middle distance. The young tracker acknowledged their arrival with a brief hand signal, but did not take his eyes from whatever he watched. Dismounting and leaving their horses ground-tethered behind the rise, they crawled forward to join Falkred at his vantage point. From there, they could see a column of figures moving across the plain perhaps half a league away, heading west with mechanical precision. Even at this distance, their appearance was unsettling. Each stood taller than a normal man, clad in dark armor that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. They moved in perfect unison, maintaining exact spacing between each figure, their pace unnaturally steady over uneven terrain. "They haven't varied their formation once since I began watching," Falkred reported quietly. "No rest, no adjustments for the landscape, no communication between them. Just constant, perfect synchronization." "Not men," Brega muttered, his hand tightening on his axe haft. "No living warriors move thus." "Yet not orcs either," Taranir observed. "Too disciplined, too uniform in size and movement." Aldor studied the distant column with growing unease. There was something fundamentally wrong about their movement, too fluid yet too rigid simultaneously, like puppets controlled by an unseen master. "They carry no visible standards," he noted. "No emblems or markings we can discern from here. No supply wagons either," Haleth added. "No provisions visible. What force travels without food or water?" The question hung unanswered as they continued to observe the column's methodical progress westward. Based on their trajectory, the mysterious warriors would pass within a few hundred yards of their position, close enough for better observation, yet hopefully distant enough to avoid detection. We maintain position and let them pass, Aldor decided. Once they're beyond us, we follow at safe distance to see where they lead. The others nodded agreement, settling into the tall grass to wait as the column drew steadily closer. Minutes stretched into a half-hour as the armored figures maintained their relentless pace across the plain. When they finally drew parallel to the watching party's position, details became clearer and more disturbing. Each figure wore identical black armor with angular plates that fitted together with unnatural precision. Their helmets concealed their faces entirely, with only narrow slits for vision. Most unsettling was the complete absence of any insignia, personal markings, or variations between them. In Aldor's experience, even the most disciplined military forces showed some individuality among their members. A slightly different way of carrying a weapon, minor variations in height or build, personal touches to their equipment. These figures showed none of that human diversity. "Look at their hands," Falkred whispered, pointing carefully. "The gauntlets." Aldor narrowed his eyes, focusing on the armored hands of the nearest figures. What he saw sent a chill through him. Each gauntlet was crafted to resemble a hand with elongated fingers, the metal worked to suggest tendons and joints. And on the palm of each, barely visible at this distance but unmistakable once noticed, was a white symbol. The white hand, Taranir breathed, Saruman's emblem. There could no longer be any doubt about the connection to Isengard. Whatever these creatures were, for Aldor was increasingly certain they were not men as he understood the term, they served the White Wizard directly. The column passed without pausing or showing any awareness of the observers hidden in the grass. Only when they had moved well beyond their position did Aldor signal for the others to withdraw back to their horses. "We follow," he confirmed once they had regrouped behind the rise, "but at greater distance than before. These are no ordinary soldiers, and I mislike the thought of being discovered by them." "What are they?" Falkred asked, the question that had been on all their minds. "Not men, surely, not as we know them. Some new devilry of Saruman's creation, perhaps," Taranir suggested grimly. "The wizard has delved deep into forbidden crafts, if rumors from the White Council are to be believed. Whatever they are, they move with purpose toward the place where your riders vanished," Brega pointed out. "That cannot be coincidence." Remounting, they began to follow the column at a safe distance, using the contours of the land for concealment when possible. The armored figures maintained their unwavering pace throughout the afternoon, covering ground with inhuman endurance. By late day, they had reached a region of low, rocky hills that marked the transition from the open plains of central Rohan to the more varied terrain approaching the gap. "We're near the missing patrol's last reported position," Haleth informed them as they paused to rest their horses. They were tasked with scouting these hills for any unusual activity from the direction of Isengard, and found it apparently, Aldor observed grimly. Though what became of them remains to be seen. As twilight approached, the column of armored figures finally halted at the base of a particularly steep hill. With the same unsettling synchronization that had characterized their march, they formed a perfect circle around the hill's perimeter, standing motionless as statues. From their vantage point atop a neighboring rise, Aldor and his companions watched this development with growing apprehension. "They guard something," Taranir surmised. But what? The answer came as darkness fell fully across the land. From the top of the hill, a pale light began to emanate, not the warm glow of campfires, but a cold, white radiance that seemed to pulse with subtle rhythm. As the light strengthened, it revealed a structure that none of them had noticed in the failing daylight. A tower, slender and black, rising perhaps 20 feet from the hilltop. "That was not there when last I patrolled these lands," Haleth stated with certainty. "This hill held nothing but grass and stone 3 months past." "Could it have been built so quickly?" Falkred wondered. Not by normal means, Taranir replied, but with Saruman's powers. The white light continued to pulse, casting eerie shadows across the landscape. The armored figures remained motionless around the hill's base, their dark forms now barely distinguishable from the surrounding night. We need closer observation, Aldor decided after considering their options. But not all of us, too many would risk detection. I'll go, Falkred volunteered immediately. I can move more silently than any here. And I, Brega added, surprising them. My people have hunted these hills for generations. I know every shadow and stone. Aldor weighed the offer carefully. The Dunlending had proven himself a valuable ally thus far, but sending him alone with Falkred still felt like a risk. Trust between their peoples had been scarce for centuries. Very well, he decided finally. Approach to observation distance only. Learn what you can of the tower and whatever it contains, but do not engage under any circumstances. If discovered, retreat immediately. Both nodded their understanding of the limitations. As they prepared to depart, Haleth pulled Falkred aside, speaking quietly into the younger man's ear. Aldor caught only fragments, something about signals and fallback positions, but was reassured by the veteran's precautions. Brega and Falkred disappeared into the darkness, moving with the practiced stealth of experienced hunters. Aldor, Taranir, and Haleth settled in to wait, maintaining vigilant watch over the hill and its mysterious tower. What do you make of it? Aldor asked Taranir quietly once the others were beyond earshot. The Gondorian's expression was grave in the dim starlight. A watchtower, perhaps, or something worse, a focal point for whatever power Saruman extends across these lands. You believe he could reach so far from Isengard. A wizard's influence is not bound by normal constraints of distance, Taranir replied, particularly one as powerful as Saruman the White. The question is not whether he could extend his reach here, but why he would choose to do so. The strategic value seems limited, Haleth observed, joining their conversation. These hills overlook nothing of particular importance. No major roads pass nearby, no settlements of significance. Unless what he seeks is not visible to normal eyes, Taranir suggested. These lands are ancient, with histories that predate both Rohan and Gondor. Who knows what might lie buried beneath these hills, awaiting rediscovery by one with the knowledge to use it. This unsettling possibility added new dimensions to their already complex situation. If Saruman sought some artifact or power from an earlier age, the missing riders might have been merely incidental, obstacles removed to prevent them from witnessing the wizard's excavations. An hour passed with excruciating slowness as they waited for Brega and Falkred to return. The pulsing light from the tower maintained its rhythmic cadence, neither strengthening nor diminishing as the night deepened around them. The armored figures remained in their perfect circle, showing no signs of fatigue or movement. Something approaches, Haleth whispered suddenly, his keen eyes detecting motion in the darkness beyond the hill. From the west, straining to see what had caught the veteran's attention, Aldor finally discerned shapes moving across the plains, a column similar to the one they had followed, but larger. As it drew closer to the hill, the pulsing light revealed details that confirmed their worst fears. More of the tall, armored figures, at least 50 in this new group, moving with the same unnatural synchronization as the others. But what truly chilled Aldor's blood was what came behind them, a line of people walking in orderly formation, their movements mechanical and their faces vacant. Men and women of various ages, dressed in the simple clothing of Dunlendings, moving as one like sleepwalkers in a shared dream. The missing villagers, he breathed, recognition striking him like a physical blow. They take them to the tower. Before they could process this disturbing development, A flicker of movement caught their attention from much closer at hand. Falkred appeared at the edge of their position, his face taut with urgency. Brega was not with him. "We must withdraw," the young tracker hissed. "Now, before they detect us." "Where is Brega?" Aldor demanded as they retrieved their horses. "Captured," Falkred replied grimly. "We separated to observe from different angles. I heard nothing, no struggle, no alarm. But when I circled back to our rendezvous point, I saw them leading him toward the tower." He walked like the others, as if in a trance. This news landed like a stone in Aldor's stomach. Not only had they lost a valuable ally, but the Dunlending chieftain now potentially served as a source of information about their mission and strength. "What did you learn before his capture?" Taranir pressed as they mounted swiftly. "The tower contains a central chamber with a glowing white stone or crystal," Falkred reported. "I couldn't see clearly through the narrow windows, but the light pulses from that source. And there are voices, not speaking but chanting in some language I've never heard. The sound," he shuddered visibly, "the sound reaches inside your mind, pulling at your thoughts." "You felt its influence?" Aldor asked sharply. Falkred nodded. "Like a fog trying to cloud my thinking. I fought it by focusing on details, counting stones, measuring distances. The moment I let my concentration slip, I felt an urge to walk toward the tower, to join those inside." This explained much about the disappearances. Both the Dunlendings and the Rohirrim patrol had likely fallen under the same influence, drawn to the tower like moths to flame. They were subsumed by whatever power pulsed within that glowing crystal. "We ride east," Aldor decided. "Put distance between ourselves and that tower before we determine our next course of action." They departed with as much stealth as possible, leading their horses until they were beyond earshot of the hill before mounting and riding into the darkness. The pulsing light receded behind them, but Aldor could not shake the feeling that something reached after them, tendrils of influence seeking to draw them back toward that unnatural tower and whatever awaited within. Chapter 4. The Blade of Eorl. Dawn found them sheltered in a narrow ravine several leagues east of the mysterious tower, horses tethered in the shadows, voices kept low despite the distance they had placed between themselves and the threat. None had slept well. Each time Aldor closed his eyes, he saw the vacant expressions of the Dunlendings walking in perfect formation toward that pulsing light, and imagined Brega among them, his fierce independence stripped away by whatever power Saruman wielded. "We need to decide our course," Taranir said, breaking the tense silence as they shared a cold breakfast. "We've confirmed Saruman's treachery and discovered the likely fate of both the missing patrol and the Dunlending settlements. By any measure, we have completed our mission and should return to Edoras with this intelligence." "And abandon Brega?" Falkred asked, guilt evident in his young face. "Leave him to whatever fate awaits in that tower." "One life against many," the Gondorian replied, not unkindly. "If Saruman builds such towers throughout the borderlands, extending his influence across Rohan, thousands will suffer the same fate. Warning your king takes precedence over rescuing a single Dunlending." Though Taranir's assessment was tactically sound, Aldor found himself resistant to the idea of retreat. "We were sent to find the missing patrol," he reminded them. "We've discovered where they were taken, but not why, nor whether they can be recovered." "You saw those armored figures," Haleth countered. "Even if we knew for certain our men were in that tower, what could 4 of us do against such numbers? We would simply be adding ourselves to the captured." The veteran scout's pragmatism was difficult to argue against. They had barely escaped detection during their observation. Any attempt at infiltration would face drastically worse odds. "There is another consideration," Aldor said after a moment's thought. "What message was carved into the stone at the Dunlending settlement?" "West toward shadows, walking willingly or controlled. That suggests this tower may not be their final destination, but rather a waypoint. They could be gathering people from across the region before moving them elsewhere. To Isengard, Taranir suggested, following the logic. Collecting workers perhaps for whatever Saruman builds there. Or soldiers, Haleth added grimly. Men can be trained to fight, willing or not. The implications were disturbing. If Saruman was indeed gathering an army from the populations of border settlements and patrols, the threat to Rohan was immediate rather than theoretical. Such information would significantly change how Theodred and the loyal captains of the Mark might respond. We need more information, Aldor decided. Not just about the tower, but about what happens to those taken inside. Are they held there or transported elsewhere? And if moved, by what route and to what destination? He looked to Falkrid. You said there were windows in the tower. Did you see any sign of our missing riders inside? The young tracker shook his head. The windows were narrow, offering limited view of the interior. I saw movement within, figures passing before the light, but couldn't distinguish individuals. So they could have already been moved elsewhere, Taranir concluded. Or they might still be inside, perhaps on a level you couldn't observe from your position. Either way, approaching the tower again seems needlessly risky, Haleth insisted. Those armored guards never seem to rest or rotate positions. What hope have we of slipping past such vigilance? A heavy silence fell over the group as they considered their limited options. The mission had grown far more complex than any had anticipated when leaving Edoras. What had begun as a scouting expedition to locate missing men had revealed a coordinated campaign by Saruman to extend his influence deep into Rohan, with implications that could reshape the balance of power throughout the region. There may be another approach, Falkrid said suddenly, breaking the silence. He reached into his tunic and withdrew a folded scrap of parchment. Before we separated, Brega gave me this. Said if anything happened to him, I should ensure it reached his clan. Unfolding the parchment revealed a rough map, hastily drawn but with clear landmarks indicating the hills where the tower stood. What caught Aldor's attention, however, was a small symbol marked several miles south of the tower's position, a crude drawing of what appeared to be a standing stone or pillar. He called it the Oath Stone, Falkrid explained. Said it marked an ancient boundary between Dunlending and Rohirrim lands, from before the time of blood between our peoples. Claimed there was a cave beneath it where his ancestors once met with yours in peace. I've never heard of such a place, Haleth said skeptically. Nor I, Aldor admitted. But much history was lost in the generations of conflict between our peoples. Taranir studied the map with interest. What significance did he attach to this stone? He didn't explain fully, Falkrid replied. Only that if he fell, his clan should be told to seek the old alliance at the Oath Stone. He seemed to think it important. Aldor considered the information carefully. Brega had proven remarkably forthcoming and helpful throughout their journey, behavior atypical for Dunlendings in their interactions with the Rohirrim. If he had emphasized the importance of this site before his capture, it likely held genuine significance. This stone and cave might offer shelter closer to the tower, he suggested. A safer observation point from which to gather the additional intelligence we need. Or a trap, Haleth warned. The Dunlending could have anticipated his own capture and left this as bait to draw the rest of us in. Possible, Aldor acknowledged, but inconsistent with his actions thus far. He fought alongside us, shared information freely, and risked himself to scout the tower. Why maintain such an elaborate deception only to spring a trap now, when he's already in Saruman's hands? The veteran scout conceded the point, with a reluctant nod. Still, approaching any location near that tower carries significant risk. Less risk than returning to the tower itself, Taranir observed, and potentially offering the additional information we agree is needed before returning to Edora's. Decision crystallized in Aldor's mind. We investigate the Oath Stone. If it offers nothing of value, we depart immediately for Edora's with what we already know. If it provides insight or advantage, we use it to gather final confirmation of where our missing men have been taken. Though Haleth still showed reservation, he raised no further objection. The decision made, they mounted and rode south, following the crude map's guidance while maintaining a healthy distance from the tower's position. The day grew warm as the spring sun climbed higher, burning away the morning mist and revealing a landscape of rugged beauty. Rolling hills interspersed with rocky outcroppings and occasional stands of gnarled trees. By midday, they approached the approximate location marked on Brega's map. The landmark proved difficult to spot at first, blending with the numerous other rock formations dotting the hillsides. It was Falkred who finally identified it. A standing stone approximately twice the height of a man, weathered by centuries of wind and rain, but still distinctly upright against the natural slopes surrounding it. "There," he called softly, pointing toward a southern hillside. Just as he described it, they approached cautiously, alert for any sign of ambush or surveillance. The standing stone stood alone on the hillside, leaning slightly after untold years of enduring the elements. As they drew closer, Aldor noticed weathered carvings on its surface, symbols he didn't recognize, neither Rohirric runes nor any script of men he had encountered. "These markings are ancient," Taranir observed, running his fingers over the eroded patterns. "Older than Rohan itself, perhaps even predating Gondor's founding." "How do we find this cave Brega mentioned?" Haleth asked, scanning the surrounding terrain with practiced eyes. "I see no obvious entrance." Falkred circled the stone slowly, examining the ground around its base. "Here," he said finally, indicating a narrow crevice in the hillside behind the monolith. "The earth has been disturbed recently. Someone has passed this way." The crack in the hillside was easily overlooked, little more than a shadow between two weathered boulders. Yet as Aldor approached and peered into the darkness, he felt a cool draft emerging from within, suggesting a larger space beyond the narrow entrance. "I'll go first," he decided, drawing his sword. "Falkred behind me, then Taranir. Haleth guard our backs." With practiced efficiency, they secured their horses to a stunted tree nearby, then prepared for the exploration. Aldor took a small torch from his saddlebag, lighting it before approaching the crevice again. The narrow opening required him to turn sideways to pass through, his sword held awkwardly before him, the torch extended to illuminate whatever lay beyond. The passage widened almost immediately, opening into a surprisingly spacious cavern within the hillside. The torch revealed walls of natural stone interspersed with sections that had clearly been worked by tools, evidence of ancient habitation or use. The air was cool but not dank, suggesting ventilation from some unseen opening elsewhere in the cave system. As the others followed him inside, their combined torchlight revealed more details. The cave extended deeper into the hillside, with several smaller chambers branching off from the main space. Near the center stood a crude table of flat stone supported by smaller rocks, surrounded by what might once have been seats arranged in a rough circle. "A meeting place," Taranir confirmed, examining the arrangement. Just as Brega suggested, somewhere neutral parties could gather in secret. "Look here," Falkred called from one of the side chambers. "Someone has been here recently." They joined the young tracker to find what appeared to be a small camp, bedding of dried grasses, the ashes of a small fire, and scraps of leather and cloth that suggested hasty repairs to equipment. "Dunlendings?" Aldor wondered aloud. "No," Haleth replied, crouching to examine the distinctive pattern of a discarded scrap of fabric. This is Rohirrim work. Our people were here. A surge of hope ran through Aldor at this revelation. The missing patrol. Possibly, the veteran nodded. The fire is cold, several days at least, but this confirms someone from the Mark found shelter here not long ago, which suggests at least some of your missing men may have escaped whatever influence drew others to the tower, Taranir concluded. Perhaps they've already returned to Edoras by another route. Unlikely, Haleth countered. Marshal Dunher would have reported immediately upon return. No word has come, which means either they're still in hiding or they were recaptured after initially escaping. The possibility that some of their countrymen might still be free, perhaps hiding in the surrounding hills, added new urgency to their mission. If riders of the Mark had resisted the tower's influence and sought refuge in this ancient meeting place, they might hold crucial information about Saruman's operations. We should search the entire cave system, Aldor decided. Look for any messages they might have left, any indication of where they plan to go next. They separated to examine the various chambers more thoroughly, checking crevices and shadows for any sign of recent habitation or hidden communications. Aldor found himself in the deepest of the side chambers, where the worked stone gave way to natural rock formations. His torch illuminated walls that glistened with mineral deposits, casting rainbow reflections across the uneven surfaces. He had nearly completed his inspection when something caught his eye, a small recess in the wall, partially concealed by a protruding stone. Drawing closer, he directed his torchlight into the cavity and was surprised to find not natural rock, but what appeared to be a wooden box, ancient and weathered but clearly crafted by human hands. Taranir Haleth Falkrid, he called, excitement rising in his voice. I've found something. The others gathered quickly, as Aldor carefully extracted the box from its hiding place. Roughly the size of a large book, it was constructed of some dark wood that had withstood the passage of centuries remarkably well, bound with bands of tarnished metal. No lock secured it, but the lid seemed sealed by age and disuse. Open it, Taranir urged, curiosity evident in his normally composed features. With careful pressure, Aldor worked the lid until it finally yielded with a dry crack of ancient joints. Inside, wrapped in what might once have been fine cloth but had deteriorated to little more than dust-like fibers, lay a knife or short sword. Its blade, perhaps 14 inches in length, showed no sign of rust or deterioration despite its obvious age. The hilt was wrapped in leather that had hardened to almost stone-like consistency, and the pommel bore a simple design of a horse's head in profile. By the gods, Haleth breathed, recognizing the significance before the others. The mark of Eorl. Eorl the Young, Aldor asked, stunned by the implication. The founder of the mark. The very same, Haleth confirmed, his usual stoicism giving way to genuine awe. That design was his personal emblem before it became the symbol of all Rohan. This blade must date from the founding of our kingdom. Or earlier, Taranir suggested, studying the weapon with scholarly interest. The craftsmanship resembles northern work from the early Third Age. It could have belonged to Eorl's father or grandfather before passing to him. Aldor lifted the blade carefully, surprised by its lightness and perfect balance. Despite centuries hidden in this cave, it remained sharp enough to split a hair, its surface gleaming in the torchlight with a faint blue-silver sheen that suggested exceptional metallurgy. Why would such a treasure be hidden here, of all places? Falkrid wondered aloud. And how did Brega know of its existence? Because this place is older and more significant than we realized, Taranir replied, his gaze sweeping the chamber with newfound appreciation. This isn't merely a meeting place. It's a monument to an alliance long forgotten by both your people and the Dunlendings. The implications of this discovery cascaded through Aldor's mind. The historical enmity between the Rohirrim and Dunlendings was so deeply entrenched that few questioned its origins or considered the possibility that relations had ever been different. Yet here was evidence suggesting cooperation, perhaps even friendship between their ancestors. "The old alliance," he murmured, recalling Brega's message. He wasn't speaking in riddles or metaphors. There truly was an alliance between our peoples, formalized at this oath stone. An alliance broken long ago, Haleth noted. Else we would not have spent generations in conflict with the hill folk. But not forgotten entirely, Aldor countered. At least not by Brega's clan. They preserved this knowledge through generations, maintained this site in secret. Which raises another question, Taranir said thoughtfully. If Brega knew of this place and its significance, why direct us here now? What value does a broken alliance from centuries past hold against the threat we currently face? Before anyone could propose an answer, Falkred's attention shifted to something on the inner lid of the box. "There's writing here," he observed, pointing to faint marks etched into the wood. "Old Rohirric, I think, but too worn to read clearly." Haleth examined the inscription, his brow furrowed in concentration. "It's a riddle or poem," he said finally. "Parts are too degraded to decipher, but I can make out phrases. When darkness rises from trusted tower, something about ancient bonds renewed, and then Blade of Oath shall reveal the power." "A prophecy," Falkred suggested. "Or instructions," Taranir countered. Many ancient artifacts were accompanied by texts explaining their purpose or proper use. Aldor studied the blade in his hand with growing certainty that they had found something of immense significance, not just historically, but practically relevant to their current mission. The timing seemed too perfect to be coincidental. Saruman's betrayal, the mysterious tower, Brega's knowledge of this hidden place, and now a weapon from Rohan's founding, accompanied by words that seemed to speak directly to their situation. "When darkness rises from trusted tower," he repeated thoughtfully. "Isengard has long been a trusted ally to Rohan, and now darkness indeed rises from it. And ancient bonds renewed could refer to cooperation between Rohirrim and Dunlendings," Taranir added, following the logic, "which Brega initiated by joining our mission." "But what if Blade of Oath shall reveal the power?" Falkred asked. "What power does this weapon hold against Saruman's sorcery?" Haleth shook his head. "Legends speak of blades with special properties forged in the northern kingdoms, weapons effective against specific enemies or in particular circumstances. But such tales rarely distinguished between metaphor and reality." As they debated the blade's potential significance, Aldor's attention was drawn to a subtle detail he hadn't initially noticed. A series of tiny runes etched along the fuller of the blade, nearly invisible unless caught at precisely the right angle by the torchlight. He tilted the weapon, trying to bring the markings into clearer view. "There are inscriptions on the blade itself," he announced, interrupting the ongoing discussion. "Different from the box lid, these look more like—" He hesitated, searching for the right comparison. "Like the markings on the standing stone outside." Taranir leaned closer, his expression shifting from curiosity to recognition. "Those are Second Age runes," he confirmed, "similar to those used in Numenor before its fall. I can read something of them." He studied the markings intently before translating. "Against the shadows reaching hand, reveal what hides at my command." "Another riddle?" Falkred asked with evident frustration. "No," Taranir replied slowly, his eyes widening with realization. "An activation phrase. This is no ordinary weapon. It's an artifact of power designed for a specific purpose." The implications hung in the air between them. If Taranir was correct, they had stumbled upon something far more valuable than a historical curiosity. A tool potentially capable of countering whatever sorcery Saruman employed from his mysterious tower. "Can you activate it?" Aldor asked the Gondorian directly. Taranir hesitated. "I can speak the words as written, but such artifacts often require specific circumstances or bloodlines to fully awaken. It may respond only to the royal line of Rohan, for instance." "Try," Aldor urged. "We have little to lose by the attempt." With careful pronunciation, Taranir recited the inscription in its original language, words that seemed to flow like water despite their ancient origins, carrying a weight and resonance that mere translation lacked. As the final syllable left his lips, they all instinctively held their breath, waiting for some dramatic transformation or burst of power. Nothing happened. The blade remained unchanged in Aldor's hand, beautiful and perfectly preserved, but showing no signs of magical awakening or hidden properties. Disappointment settled over the group as they exchanged glances of shared frustration. "Perhaps it requires more than words," Haleth suggested after a moment. "Specific actions or locations. Or perhaps its power is subtle rather than obvious," Taranir added. "Not all enchantments manifest in visible ways." Before they could explore further theories, a sudden commotion reached them from outside the cave. The alarmed whinny of horses followed by a muffled thud. Haleth immediately moved toward the entrance, sword drawn, while the others quickly gathered their equipment. "Someone approaches," the veteran scout reported in a harsh whisper. Multiple riders, moving with haste. Aldor made a swift decision, securing the ancient blade through his belt while returning his standard sword to its scabbard. Whatever power the artifact might possess, having an extra weapon could only help in the confrontation that potentially awaited them. "Defensive positions," he ordered quietly. "Haleth left of the entrance, Falkrid right. Taranir and I will position behind that central stone table for additional coverage." They moved with practiced efficiency, extinguishing all but one torch to reduce visibility while maintaining minimal light for themselves. The cave entrance, narrow and easily defensible, would force any attackers to enter single file, creating a significant tactical advantage for the defenders despite their smaller numbers. Tense moments passed as they listened to approaching hoofbeats slow and stop outside. Voices murmured just beyond the cave mouth, too indistinct to identify clearly. Then came the sound of someone dismounting, followed by cautious footsteps approaching the crevice that served as entrance. Aldor gripped the hilt of the ancient blade, uncertain whether to expect armored servants of Saruman or perhaps Dunlendings seeking their missing chieftain. The footsteps paused just outside the narrow opening, and a shadow fell across the dim light filtering in from outside. "Hello, the cave," called a voice, female, strong, and startlingly familiar. "I know you're within. Show yourselves peacefully, or face the consequences." Shock and relief washed through Aldor in equal measure as he recognized the speaker. "Lady Eowyn," he called back, rising from his position. "Is that you?" A moment's silence then. "Aldor, by the gods, you yet live." The shadow moved as she approached the entrance more directly. "We feared you lost when no word came." "We're all here," he confirmed, signaling the others to stand down. "Myself, Haleth, and Falkrid, and Taranir of Gondor. Only Brega the Dunlending has been taken." "Then make haste," she urged. "We have much to discuss and little time for explanations. Theodred awaits us 2 leagues east with the main company." This news brought fresh surprise. "Theodred left Edoras, how?" "All will be explained," she promised. "But not here. These hills grow more dangerous by the hour. Gather your belongings quickly." As they collected their equipment and prepared to depart, Aldor felt the weight of the ancient blade against his hip, a tangible reminder of the mystery they had uncovered in this hidden place. Whatever purpose it had served in the past or might serve in their present crisis remained unclear, but its discovery no longer seemed coincidental. Destiny, perhaps, had guided them to this forgotten alliance place, just as events now brought unexpected reinforcements in their hour of need. As they emerged from the cave into the bright afternoon sunlight, Aldor saw Eowyn mounted on her white horse, accompanied by 6 Rohirrim riders wearing the insignia of Theodred's personal guard, elite warriors handpicked for their loyalty and skill. The situation has deteriorated rapidly since your departure, Eowyn informed them as they mounted their own horses. Grima's influence over the king grows stronger by the day, and strange reports come from throughout the western marches. People vanishing, unnatural storms, and most concerning, sightings of armed companies moving under cover of darkness. We've seen such a company ourselves, Aldor replied grimly. And worse, a tower where none stood before, drawing people to it like moths to flame. Eowyn's expression hardened. Theodred suspected as much. It's why he defied his father's implicit orders and rode west with 200 riders 3 days past. He claimed to be conducting standard exercises, but in truth, he seeks confirmation of Saruman's treachery, confirmation you appear to have found. As they rode eastward under Eowyn's escort, Aldor felt both trepidation and hope rising within him. Their small scouting mission had unexpectedly intersected with much larger events, the beginning of Rohan's response to a threat few yet fully comprehended. What role the ancient Blade of Eorl might play in the coming conflict remained to be seen, but its weight against his side offered strange comfort as they rode to join Theodred's company and share the dark tidings they had gathered. Behind them, the sun began its westward descent, casting long shadows across the plains of Rohan, shadows that seemed to reach, like grasping fingers, from the direction of Isengard. Chapter 5. The Reclamation. The camp of Theodred's company sprawled across a sheltered valley, hidden from distant observation by surrounding hills. As Aldor rode in with Eowyn and their escort, he was struck by the disciplined efficiency with which the second marshal had organized his forces. 200 riders, their horses, and necessary supplies had been arranged to allow for swift deployment while maintaining defensive positions against potential attack. Campfires burned low despite the deepening evening chill, a precaution against detection from afar. Riders moved with purpose rather than haste, their expressions revealing the seriousness with which they approached this unauthorized expedition. These were Theodred's most trusted men, Aldor realized, warriors whose loyalty to Rohan transcended even the increasingly questionable orders emanating from Meduseld under Grima's influence. At the center of the camp stood Theodred's command tent, distinguished by the subtle green and gold banners of his personal standard. Guards saluted as Eowyn led their small party directly to this destination, dismounting and gesturing for them to follow. Inside, Theodred bent over a large map spread across a campaign table, surrounded by his most senior captains. He looked up as they entered, his face showing momentary relief at the sight of Aldor and his companions before settling back into the grave expression he had worn since they departed Edoras. "Cousin," he greeted Aldor with a firm clasp of forearms. "We feared you lost when you did not follow the expected route west. We chose a less obvious approach," Aldor explained. "It seems that decision served us well, given what we discovered." "Tell me everything," Theodred commanded, dismissing the other captains with a gesture. Only Eowyn remained as Aldor, and his companions positioned themselves around the map table. "Leave nothing out, no matter how strange it may seem." Over the next hour, they recounted their journey in detail. The mysterious tracks at the Entwash, the abandoned Dunlending settlement, the armored figures bearing Saruman's emblem, and most significantly, the tower with its pulsing light that seemed to control the minds of those drawn to it. "And you believe our missing patrol was taken there?" Theodred asked, his finger tracing their described route on the map. Initially, yes, Aldor confirmed. But what we found at the Oath Stone suggests at least some may have escaped the tower's influence. The Oath Stone, Theodred's brow furrowed. I know of no such landmark. Aldor indicated the location on the map. An ancient meeting place between Dunlendings and Rohirrim, apparently from the time of Eorl himself. We found evidence that members of the missing patrol had sheltered there recently. And this blade you discovered, Theodred prompted, his gaze falling to the ancient weapon now secured at Aldor's side. With reverent care, Aldor drew the blade and placed it on the map table. In the lantern light of the command tent, its perfectly preserved surface gleamed with the same subtle blue-silver sheen they had noted in the cave. It bears the mark of Eorl, he explained, indicating the horsehead pommel, and inscriptions in ancient runes that suggest it holds power against the kind of sorcery Saruman now employs. Theodred studied the weapon with intense interest, but did not touch it. Have you seen evidence of this power? No, Aldor admitted. Taranir spoke the activation phrase inscribed on the blade, but nothing visible occurred. Either it requires something more to awaken, or its properties are subtle rather than dramatic. The second marshal nodded thoughtfully. Many tales are told of the founding of the Mark, of alliances formed and broken, of ancient powers confronted and subdued. Most have been dismissed as mere legend by recent generations, but my grandfather, he paused, something like sadness flickering across his features. King Thengel believed there was truth behind many of these stories. He taught me to respect the old knowledge, even when I could not verify its accuracy. This blade is certainly real, Taranir observed, and its preservation despite centuries in that cave suggests properties beyond ordinary metallurgy. What of Brega? Yoan asked, bringing their attention back to more immediate concerns. You said he was captured near the tower. Yes, Falkrid confirmed, guilt still evident in his voice. We separated to observe from different angles. When I returned to our meeting point, I saw him being led toward the tower. He walked like the others, blank-faced, moving mechanically. And you believe the tower's influence extends throughout the western marches? Theodred asked, his tactical mind already calculating the strategic implications. The evidence suggests multiple such towers, Aldor replied. Brega spoke of 3 Dunlending settlements that had been emptied. The missing patrol was taken from a location many leagues from where we discovered the tower. Either its influence reaches incredibly far, or more likely, Saruman has constructed several such structures across the borderlands. This information visibly troubled Theodred. He straightened from the map table, pacing the limited confines of the command tent as he processed its implications. If Saruman can extend his will across our territories through these towers, controlling the minds of both Rohirrim and Dunlendings. He left the sentence unfinished, the consequences too dire to voice explicitly. He builds an army, Yoan completed the thought, ever practical in her assessments. Not just of orcs bred in the depths of Isengard, but of men taken from our own lands and bent to his purpose. An army that could strike from within our borders, Theodred agreed grimly, attacking not just our defenses but our very unity as a people. How can we fight an enemy that wears the faces of our neighbors, our kin? The question hung heavily in the air, unanswerable with their current knowledge and resources. Aldor found his hand drifting unconsciously to the hilt of the ancient blade, wondering again what power it might hold against such a threat. "What of your mission, my lord?" Haleth asked Theodred directly. "You left Edoras with significant force despite the political risks. What did you hope to accomplish?" The second marshal returned to the map table, his expression resolute. "Confirmation, primarily. Reports had reached me of unusual activities throughout the western marches. Disappearances similar to those you investigated, strange structures being raised overnight, armored companies moving with unnatural precision. I needed to verify these accounts personally before challenging Grima's narrative that all remains well between Rohan and Isengard. And now that we've provided such confirmation, Aldor pressed. Now we act, Theodred declared, his voice hardening with determination. First, to rescue any of our people who can still be saved. Second, to destroy at least one of these towers, proving they can be overcome. And third, to gather evidence that even Grima cannot dismiss regarding Saruman's betrayal. The boldness of this plan startled Aldor. With only 200 riders, Theodred proposed to directly challenge the power of a wizard who had apparently spent months or years preparing his subversion of Rohan's western territories. The tower we observed was heavily guarded, he cautioned. At least 70 of those armored figures surrounded it, with more arriving as we watched. And we still don't understand the nature of the control it exerts or how to counter it, which is why timing and approach will be crucial, Theodred acknowledged. We cannot simply charge in with force alone. We need precision, knowledge, and perhaps. His gaze fell meaningfully on the ancient blade. Perhaps older powers to counter the wizard's craft. You believe this weapon might indeed hold some advantage against Saruman's sorcery? Taranir asked, his diplomat's caution evident in his tone. I believe we would be fools to ignore any potential asset, Theodred replied pragmatically, especially one that comes to us through such seemingly providential circumstances. He turned to Eowyn, who had been listening intently throughout the discussion. What news from your scouting parties? Have they located the missing patrol members who may have escaped the tower's influence? Nothing definitive, she replied. But there have been sightings of small groups moving furtively through the hills south of the tower's position. They avoid contact and disappear if approached directly. Our men would be cautious if they'd witnessed what happened to their companions, Haleth observed, especially if they realize the extent of Saruman's reach. We need to make contact, Theodred decided. If any of the patrol escaped and have been observing the tower, their intelligence could prove invaluable to our approach. He looked to Aldor. You found evidence of their presence in the cave. Could you locate it again in darkness? Yes, Aldor confirmed without hesitation. The oath stone is distinctive enough to find even by starlight. Good, you'll lead a small party back there tonight. If members of the missing patrol have been using it as a refuge, they may return after nightfall when movement is safer. The logic was sound, though the prospect of approaching so near the tower again in darkness sent a chill through Aldor. Still, the possibility of locating survivors from the missing patrol outweighed his personal apprehension. What of the Dunlending? Falkred asked. Brega, do we attempt to rescue him as well? A brief silence fell over the tent. The long-standing enmity between Rohirrim and Dunlendings made such a question unusual. Yet Brega had proven himself an ally through his actions, rather than mere words. If he can be recovered without compromising our primary mission, yes, Theodred finally answered. He risked himself alongside Rohirrim. He deserves the same loyalty in return. He glanced at Eowyn, and forging new understanding with the Dunlending clans could prove valuable in the coming conflict, especially if Saruman targets both our peoples. The blade suggests our ancestors once stood together against a common threat, Aldor added, gesturing to the ancient weapon. Perhaps history repeats itself. Let us hope it repeats the victory rather than whatever subsequent betrayal shattered that alliance, Theodred remarked dryly. Prepare yourselves. You ride for the oath stone in 1 hour, with sufficient escort to ensure you reach it safely. As the meeting concluded and they exited the command tent, twilight had settled fully across the plains. Theodred's camp seemed to fade into the landscape, its fires burning low, its activities muted to avoid detection by unfriendly eyes. Aldor felt the weight of their newly expanded mission settling on his shoulders. No longer merely scouts gathering intelligence, but now advance agents for a direct military response to Saruman's encroachment. "You've done well," Eowyn told him quietly as they walked toward where fresh horses were being prepared. "Few would have shown such resourcefulness when faced with what you discovered." "I merely followed the path before me," Aldor replied, uncomfortable with praise from the king's niece. "Though I confess, when Grima selected me to lead this mission, I suspected I was being set up for failure." "You were," she confirmed bluntly. "He never expected you to return with actionable intelligence. More likely, he hoped you would become yet another mysterious disappearance, removing a loyal rider while reinforcing the narrative that the western borders are simply unsafe, rather than deliberately compromised." The calculated coldness of such a strategy struck Aldor anew. How can he betray Rohan so thoroughly? He is one of our own, raised in our lands, trusted by our king. Is he? Eowyn's expression darkened. Grima's loyalties have always been complex. His mother was not of Rohan, and he studied abroad in his youth. Who knows what influences shaped him, what promises were made to him? Before they could pursue this troubling line of speculation further, a commotion arose from the eastern perimeter of the camp. Shouts carried through the evening air, followed by the thunder of approaching hooves, a single horse being ridden hard toward the camp. "Rider approaching from the east," called one of the perimeter guards. "He bears the insignia of Erkenbrand's household." This announcement caused immediate interest among the nearby Rohirrim. Lord Erkenbrand commanded the Westfold, the region most directly threatened by Saruman's apparent betrayal. If he had sent a messenger to Theodred's position, the news was unlikely to be good. The rider entered the camp at a gallop, his horse lathered with sweat from hard riding. He dismounted with obvious urgency, demanding to be taken immediately to Theodred. Guards escorted him swiftly to the command tent, while stable hands attended to his exhausted mount. "We should hear this news," Eowyn declared, already moving to follow. Aldor hesitated only briefly before accompanying her. Whatever message came from Erkenbrand likely affected their impending mission to the Oath Stone. They re-entered the command tent to find Theodred receiving the messenger, a young man bearing the dust and weariness of long, hard travel, yet delivering his report with precise military efficiency. "3 more settlements emptied in the past week, my lord," he was saying. "Upwards of 200 people simply gone overnight, with no signs of struggle or forced removal. Lord Erkenbrand has ordered the evacuation of all smaller hamlets, consolidating our people in Helm's Deep and the larger fortified towns." "Wise precaution," Theodred nodded grimly. "What of the western watchtowers? Have they reported any unusual sightings?" "That's just it, my lord. 3 of the watchtowers have gone silent. When scouts were sent to investigate, they found them abandoned. No blood, no signs of battle, just empty." "Like the settlements." Theodred's jaw tightened visibly. "And the timing of these disappearances? Any pattern?" "All occurred during moonless nights," the messenger confirmed, "and always preceded by reports of cold mists rising from the ground after sunset." Aldor and Eowyn exchanged knowing glances. This matched exactly what Brega had described before the Dunlending settlements were emptied, the cold mists that heralded the tower's influence extending across the land. "There's more, my lord," the messenger continued, his voice dropping slightly. "Lord Erkenbrand sent riders to Isengard 3 days past, seeking explanation for increased orc sightings along our borders. They did not return. When a second party was dispatched to discover their fate, they found the road to Isengard blocked by armed companies, not orcs, but men in strange black armor who ordered them to turn back in the name of Saruman." "The same armored figures we observed," Aldor interjected, unable to remain silent. They bear the white hand emblem on their gauntlets. Theodred acknowledged this confirmation with a grim nod before turning back to the messenger. What are Erkenbrand's current dispositions? He has mobilized all available forces, my lord. The Westfold musters at Helm's Deep, with scouts dispatched throughout the region to warn outlying settlements. He awaits orders from Edoras, but the young rider hesitated. But he suspects no such orders will come, Theodred finished for him. At least none reflecting the true gravity of our situation. Yes, my lord. He instructed me to find you directly, bypassing the normal chain of command. He said, another hesitation. He said to tell you that Rohan's hour grows dark, and those who remember their oaths must act regardless of the political consequences. These were dangerous words, implying action independent of the king's direct command. Yet Theodred received them without visible surprise. Return to Lord Erkenbrand with this message. Hold the Westfold as best he can. I ride to confirm what we both suspect, and will bring proof too concrete for even the most silver-tongued counselor to dismiss. As the messenger departed with these instructions, Theodred turned to those remaining in the tent, his expression resolute. Our timetable accelerates. If Saruman moves this openly against the Westfold, his overall plans must be nearing completion. The tower, Aldor suggested, could it be part of some larger working of sorcery? The final piece needed before he launches a full attack. Possibly, or a means of continuing to gather forces without raising obvious alarms. Theodred studied the map again, his finger tracing the positions of known disappearances. These aren't random targets. He takes from specific locations, border settlements, patrol routes, watchtowers, places where the absence might not be immediately noticed, but which compromise our defensive awareness. He blinds us before striking, Eowyn concluded, removing our eyes and ears along the borders, while gathering controlled forces within our own territory. Then our mission becomes even more crucial, Aldor realized. If we can confirm how these towers function and demonstrate they can be overcome, we restore hope of resistance. Theodred straightened, decision crystallizing in his bearing. We ride at first light, not just your small party to the Oath Stone, but our full company to the tower itself. One night for preparation and rest, then we move against Saruman's outpost directly. This declaration sent ripples of both excitement and apprehension through those present. What had begun as a reconnaissance mission had transformed into the opening gambit of what might become open war between Rohan and Isengard. Tonight's mission proceeds as planned, Theodred continued, looking to Aldor. Find any survivors from the missing patrol, gather what intelligence they may have, and return before dawn. Tomorrow we strike. With these orders clear, preparations intensified throughout the camp. Aldor found himself at the center of urgent activity, selecting 5 riders to accompany him back to the Oath Stone, while simultaneously briefing Theodred's captains on everything they had observed about the tower's defenses and surroundings. As midnight approached, Aldor and his small party prepared to depart. Haleth would remain with the main camp, his experience needed to help plan the following day's assault. Falkred, however, insisted on returning to the Oath Stone, his tracking skills potentially crucial for locating any patrol members who might be hiding in the surrounding hills. To Aldor's surprise, Taranir also volunteered to join the night mission. "My eyes see well in darkness," the Gondorian explained simply. "And if we encounter survivors, a neutral face might prove less startling than a company of armed Rohirrim." The final 2 members of their party were experienced scouts from Theodred's personal guard, Wulfgar, a veteran of countless border skirmishes with keen night vision, and Guthard, younger but renowned for his ability to move silently even in full armor. As they mounted under a sky brilliant with stars but no moon, Eowyn approached Aldor one final time. "Take this," she said, handing him what appeared to be a small horn carved from pale wood. "One of our heirlooms, said to carry sound farther than normal instruments. If you find yourself in dire need, or if you locate the survivors and need swift extraction, sound it once. The main camp will hear and respond." Aldor accepted the horn, securing it to his belt opposite the ancient Blade of Eorl. "We'll return before dawn," he promised. "See that you do," she replied with unexpected intensity. "I believe your role in what comes next is greater than any of us yet understand." With those cryptic words lingering in his thoughts, Aldor led his small company out of the camp, riding west through the star-dappled darkness toward the Oath Stone and whatever awaited them there. The night journey proved tense but uneventful. They rode without torches, relying on starlight and the remarkable night vision of their mounts, bred for generations to navigate the plains of Rohan in darkness. Conversation remained minimal, each rider alert for any sign of the armored patrols they had observed earlier. They approached the Oath Stone from the east, as they had earlier that day, but with far greater caution. When the standing stone's silhouette became visible against the night sky, Aldor signaled for them to dismount and proceed on foot, leaving their horses secured in a small copse of trees some distance away. The stone stood solitary and ancient against the starlit horizon, its weathered surface catching the pale light in patterns that almost seemed deliberate, as if the carvings had been designed to reveal different aspects of their meaning, depending on how light fell upon them. "The cave entrance is behind the stone," Aldor whispered to his companions. "We'll approach in pairs, maintaining sufficient distance that an ambush couldn't take all of us at once." Taranir and Falkred would approach first, the Gondorian's keen eyes and the tracker's woodcraft making them ideal for initial reconnaissance. Aldor and Wulfgar would follow at a distance of 30 paces, with Guthred remaining farther back as rearguard and messenger should complications arise. As the first pair began their cautious advance toward the standing stone, Aldor felt an unexpected warmth at his side. The ancient blade, still secured at his hip, seemed to radiate heat through its scabbard. Drawing it partially, he was startled to see a faint blue glow emanating from its surface, visible even in the darkness. "It awakens," Taranir whispered, having glanced back and noticed the phenomenon. "Something nearby triggers its power." Before Aldor could respond, Falkred raised a hand in warning, pointing toward the cave entrance behind the standing stone. In the darkness, barely visible to normal sight, several figures moved with the caution of hunted men, emerging from the cave entrance only to freeze at the realization they were not alone. "Hold," Aldor called softly but clearly, stepping forward with empty hands raised to show peaceful intent. "We are riders of Rohan, sent by 2nd Marshal Theodred to find survivors of Marshal Dunher's patrol." Tense silence followed his declaration. Then, from among the shadowed figures, a gruff voice responded, "Prove your claim, stranger. These hills are full of deceptions." "I am Aldor, son of Aldhelm, cousin to Theodred," he replied steadily. "We departed Edoras 6 days past to investigate the disappearance of your patrol, discovering evidence you had sheltered in this cave." After another pause, one figure detached from the group, approaching with the measured caution of a veteran warrior. As he drew nearer, starlight revealed a man of middle years, his beard salted with gray, his Rohirrim armor battered but serviceable. "Marshal Dunher," Aldor breathed, recognizing the leader of the missing patrol. "You live." "Some of us, at least," the marshal confirmed grimly. 8 of my 12 men resisted whatever foul power took the others. We've been hiding, watching, trying to understand what happened before risking return to Edoras." Relief surged through Aldor at this confirmation, quickly followed by urgent purpose. Theodred camps 2 leagues east with 200 riders. We ride at dawn to strike the tower where we believe your missing men were taken." Dunher's weathered face registered shock, then grim satisfaction. So the second marshal moved despite his father's restrictions. "Good. We have observed much these past days that demands immediate response." At the marshal's gesture, the remaining survivors emerged from the shadows near the cave, 7 riders of varying ages, all showing signs of deprivation and hardship, but maintaining the disciplined bearing of Rohan's elite cavalry. Their expressions reflected simultaneous relief at this contact with friendly forces and wariness born of whatever horrors they had witnessed. "Inside," Dunher ordered, gesturing toward the cave. "What we must discuss should not be spoken under open sky, even in darkness." They gathered in the main chamber of the cave system, a single small fire providing minimal light and warmth. Aldor signaled for Guthard to return to their horses, ensuring they remained secured and ready for swift departure if needed. Once assembled, Dunher wasted no time with lengthy preamble. "We were patrolling the western marches as ordered when we encountered the first signs of strangeness. Cold mists rising from the ground after sunset, unnatural stillness among the wildlife, a persistent sense of being watched from afar." He paused, seeming to organize difficult memories. "On our third night, we camped near a hill much like any other in these parts. Nothing marked it as significant or dangerous. Yet as midnight approached, 4 of my men simply stood up from where they rested, laid down their weapons and began walking toward the hill. Their eyes were open but vacant, their movements mechanical. Like sleepwalkers," one of the other survivors added, his young face haunted by the memory. "We called to them, tried to restrain them, but it was as if they couldn't hear or see us at all. I ordered restraints," Dunher continued. "We bound their hands and feet, thinking whatever trance had taken them might pass by morning. Instead, the effect spread. By dawn, 4 more of my men had fallen into the same state, straining against their bonds to answer some silent summons." "How did you escape it yourself?" Taranir asked, professional interest evident in his tone. "I cannot say with certainty," the marshal admitted. "Those affected seemed to share no obvious common trait or vulnerability. Yet as the strange compulsion spread through our company, I noticed it affected first those who had been sleeping most deeply when it began. Those of us who resisted had all been more wakeful, more alert, either on watch or simply restless that night." "Consciousness," Falkred suggested. "Active minds perhaps resist the influence more effectively than those relaxed in sleep." "Perhaps," Dunher acknowledged, "though even while awake we felt the pull, a whispering at the edges of thought, urging us toward that hill. It took considerable will to ignore it, and the effect strengthened as dawn approached." "What happened then?" Aldor prompted, aware that time was passing and they needed to return to Theodred's camp before morning. "We were forced to choose," Dunher replied, his expression grim. The affected men had become violent in their determination to reach the hill, fighting against restraints with strength beyond normal limits. We couldn't control them while simultaneously resisting the influence ourselves, so we let them go. The admission clearly pained him, a commander allowing half his men to walk into unknown danger. Yet Aldor understood the impossible situation he had faced. "We followed at a distance," one of the other survivors added. "Watched them climb the hill, which at that time showed no structures or buildings upon it. They simply stood in a circle at its crest, motionless as if waiting. By nightfall of that day, the tower had appeared," Dunher continued, "rising from the hilltop as if it had always been there, though we had observed the empty hill throughout the day. Dark stone, perfectly fitted, without signs of normal construction." "Sorcery," Taranir murmured. "Saruman's power made manifest. Since then, we've observed other groups brought to the tower, Dunlendings primarily, but also more Rohirrim, mostly from isolated farmsteads and small settlements, all walking with the same vacant expressions, the same mechanical movements. "Have you seen what happens to them inside the tower?" Aldor asked, the critical question that might inform their coming assault. Dunher shook his head. "We dared not approach too closely after dark, when the tower's influence seemed strongest. During daylight, we observed some being marched away in formation, heading west toward Isengard, we believe. Others remain, moving about the tower's exterior in patterns that suggest they serve as laborers or builders, expanding something at the tower's base." This information confirmed their worst suspicions, while adding new dimensions to consider. Some captives were apparently being sent directly to Isengard, while others remained to serve the tower's immediate needs. Which group included the missing riders remained unknown. "What of the armored figures?" Falkred asked. "The tall warriors in black who guard the tower's perimeter. They began arriving 3 days past," Dunher replied, "marching in perfect formation from the direction of Isengard. Their presence made closer observation impossible. They patrol with inhuman vigilance, never seeming to tire or rest." Aldor shared a glance with Taranir, confirming these were indeed the same forces they had observed. "Did you note the emblem on their gauntlets, the white hand?" "Aye," one of the older survivors growled. "Saruman's mark, plain as day. The wizard makes no attempt to hide his involvement anymore, because he believes his position secure," Taranir suggested. "The tower's established, the king's mind poisoned by Grima, Rohan's defenses compromised through these disappearances. He prepares for open conflict, confident in his advantage." The assessment was chillingly plausible. If Saruman had spent months or years developing these towers and their mind-controlling properties, while simultaneously extending his influence in Edoras through Grima, he might indeed believe victory already assured. "There's one more thing you should know," Dunher added, his voice dropping lower. "2 nights past, we observed someone important arrive at the tower, a figure in white robes, mounted on a horse of similar color. The armored guards formed an honor guard for this visitor, who entered the tower and remained inside for several hours." "Saruman himself," Aldor breathed, the implications immediately clear. "He inspects his outposts personally." "If so, he departed before dawn," Dunher confirmed, riding back toward Isengard accompanied by a strong escort of the armored guards. This news would be of immense interest to Theodred. If Saruman visited his towers on some regular schedule, timing their assault to avoid his presence would significantly improve their chances of success. "We need to return to the main camp immediately," Aldor decided. "Theodred must have this intelligence before finalizing tomorrow's assault plans." Dunher nodded agreement. "My men are weak from limited provisions and constant vigilance, but we can ride. Our mounts are hidden in a draw half a league south of here." As they prepared to depart the cave, Aldor noticed that the ancient blade at his side continued to emit its subtle blue glow, though the warmth he had felt earlier had diminished. Remembering the activation phrase Taranir had translated, "Against the shadows reaching hand, reveal what hides at my command," he wondered if the weapon's awakening related specifically to the proximity of Saruman's influence. They emerged from the cave into the star-filled night, moving with practiced stealth despite their increased numbers. As Dunher led them south toward where his men had concealed their horses, Aldor found himself scanning the western horizon, where the distant tower would stand though invisible in darkness at this range. The night remained quiet as they collected the patrol's horses and began the journey eastward toward Theodred's camp. Perhaps too quiet, Aldor realized with growing unease. The normal sounds of nocturnal wildlife, the occasional owl hoot, the rustle of small creatures in the grass, were conspicuously absent. The plains held the unnatural silence they had noted before previous encounters with the armored guards. "Something approaches," Falkred whispered, his tracker's instincts alerting him to disturbances too subtle for others to detect. From the southwest, moving quickly, they halted, straining eyes and ears into the darkness. At first, Aldor perceived nothing beyond the star-dappled landscape. Then, gradually, he became aware of rhythmic vibrations through the ground beneath his horse's hooves, the impact of many feet moving in perfect synchronization. "Dismount," Dunher ordered quietly. "Lead the horses into that depression. No sudden movements that might catch attention in the starlight." They complied swiftly, guiding their mounts into a shallow ravine that offered minimal concealment but might suffice if whatever approached maintained its current trajectory, rather than coming directly toward them. From their position, they soon observed what had triggered Falkred's warning: a column of armored figures marching northeastward across the plains, their movements maintaining the same unnatural precision they had noted previously. At least 30 of the tall warriors proceeded in perfect formation, their black armor making them nearly invisible against the night landscape, except when starlight occasionally glinted off a helmet or shoulder plate. "They head toward Edoras," Wulfgar whispered, identifying their trajectory with a veteran's eye for distance and direction. "No," Aldor corrected grimly. "They march directly toward Theodred's position." The realization sent ice through his veins. The second marshal's camp, though carefully positioned and maintaining minimal visibility, had somehow been detected by Saruman's forces. Whether through magical means or conventional scouting, the wizard had located their position and dispatched troops to intercept them before they could act against the tower. "We must warn them," Dunher urged, already turning back toward his horse. "Wait," Taranir cautioned, laying a restraining hand on the marshal's arm. "This column alone is not large enough to threaten 200 riders. It must be part of a larger strategy, perhaps intended to flush Theodred into more open ground where a larger force awaits." The Gondorians' tactical assessment made sense. 30 armored guards, formidable as they appeared, could not hope to defeat Theodred's company in direct confrontation. Their purpose must be more subtle: reconnaissance, perhaps, or provocation. "Or they serve as collectors," Falkred suggested quietly, extending the tower's influence closer to the camp, attempting to draw sleeping men under its control as happened with your patrol. This possibility struck Aldor as frighteningly plausible. If the armored guards could somehow project or amplify the tower's mind-controlling properties, they might not need to defeat Theodred's forces through combat, merely subvert enough of them to create chaos and division. "Yoan's horn," he decided, reaching for the instrument she had provided. "We'll alert the camp to danger without revealing our own position." As the column of armored figures continued their relentless march toward the northeast, Aldor raised the pale wooden horn to his lips and blew a single, clear note. The sound that emerged surprised them all, far louder and purer than the instrument's size would suggest, carrying across the plains with supernatural clarity. "Now we ride," he ordered as the echoes faded. Not directly to camp, but circling wide to approach from the south rather than the west. "If these guards are indeed projecting the tower's influence, we need to avoid trailing in their wake." Mounting swiftly, they set off at a gallop, pushing their tired horses harder than was wise but necessary given the urgency of their situation. As they rode, Aldor became aware that the ancient blade at his side now pulsed with blue light in rhythm with their movement, as if responding to their race against Saruman's forces. Behind them, barely visible in the darkness, other columns of armored figures emerged from different directions, all converging on the location of Theodred's camp with inexorable precision. The warning horn had alerted the second marshal to imminent danger, But whether his forces could respond effectively against this coordinated approach from multiple directions remained to be seen. As they rode through the night, Aldor felt the weight of responsibility pressing down upon him more heavily than ever before. What had begun as a simple scouting mission had uncovered the opening moves of what might become the greatest threat Rohan had faced in generations. And somehow, through chains of circumstance he still couldn't fully comprehend, he found himself carrying what might be their best hope of resistance, an ancient blade of forgotten power, awakening to its purpose after centuries of dormancy. Behind them, the armored columns advanced with mechanical precision toward Theodred's position. Ahead, the eastern horizon remained dark, dawn still hours away. Between these points, 16 riders of Rohan raced desperately to reach their companions before Saruman's forces could spring whatever trap they had laid. And at Aldor's side, the Blade of Eorl continued to pulse with blue fire, its glow strengthening with each passing mile, as if eager for the confrontation that surely awaited them.